That time an American was reincarnated into another world. Chapter 271: Glacier Enemies. Over the course of several days, teams and soldiers from both San Industries and Iron Legion were brought to the island. After sifting through the mantle's data more, I discovered their name for the landmass: the Island of Continuance. Amara had spent the preceding days taking the others to clear out shades from all across the upper city. When the soldiers arrived with plenty of armament, including an outfit of tanks and aircraft, a base was established next to the citadel, and any shades that dared approach were eradicated with impunity. That didn't stop most of the newcomers from having nightmares the first night, but they had already been briefed on the circumstances. Everyone who was brought to Continuance was here for the next decade at minimum. I didn't intend to let any of them, except for the highest authority soldiers, go back to the mainland, which was why after complexes were constructed and when the city was declared relatively safe, the families of all those stationed here would be moved. That was especially so for those who had come from Wonderland, who were already familiar with the stringent demands. The island was now one of my greatest secrets, something that was mine and mine alone. Neither the church nor the kingdom knew anything about it, and I intended to keep it that way. Most importantly, not even my desert eagles knew anything about the heart. I hadn't let them peer at the data. I hadn't even spoken about it to Amara, who tactfully refrained from asking questions. They didn't know about the true nature of the heart, what it did, or its history. All they knew was what they saw. While that was a significant leak in itself, it also wasn't enough for them to make the wild guess about what it truly was. It was a powerful source of mana and vigor that underwent some mysterious process. That was it. I doubted even Quan and Song understood what they had seen. As for Kata, my greatest concern regarding my information lock, she understood even less, no doubt. Even if she told her father about the island, he likely wouldn't take it as a big enough deal to demand investigation. Of course, nobody could ever predict what Anderson might do should he learn about this. He was a wild card as much as a person could be, but I doubted that Kata would spill the beans. While I'd have to let her go back and visit her father eventually, she seemed rebellious enough to keep some things for herself, including this experience. I'd already had my talks with her. Unfortunately, she was protected enough to force me into a wait-and-see approach. Of course, if she wanted any part in Sector 4 in the future, she needed to have my trust. Leaking things would forfeit that, and she knew it. With construction underway and with the city on lockdown, I finally pulled us out of the island. We flew back to the mainland, and everyone got some much-needed R&R. There were no missions for a week, not that I was idle for any of it. To Amara's dismay, I was hard at work as soon as we returned. Polly and San both had plenty of things to brief me on, and a pompous Englishman was demanding my presence. I sent Amara to handle him while I got updates on everything else. San Industries was at an all-time economic and industrial high. San was pulling in so much money that he couldn't spend it all if he tried. Billions of coin were moving through his company, and his operations had scaled so high that his greatest issue right now was finding people to hire. All those readily available across the kingdom were already working for him, including a significant percentage of the world's summoner population. Thankfully, the company had become so rich and famous that there were constantly renowned craftsmen, enchanters, thinkers, and inventors crawling to him for a job. Jobs were getting filled as fast as they were opening. But I had prepared for this eventuality as well, and San followed directions well. He had already started grabbing the talented and entrepreneurial and throwing them into the world with companies of their own. San Industries couldn't make everything, not because it was incapable, but because people wouldn't stand for it. If everything ever made had the San Industries stamp on it, then the company would start becoming a kingdom unto itself. At that point, I'd be directly inducing the creation of the world's first antitrust laws. I wasn't interested in that, but creating dozens of smaller companies that other people had to run, companies that they'd be managing and paying me to operate, now that was an attractive deal. San agreed, and so batches of people were sent out to be fruitful. Most of them were little companies that built little things with the help of San Industries' tech and knowledge. We gave them things like the mana engine, and they created tools to do anything from carpentry to construction. This was also how we started bringing magic to the ordinary population. With my trains in farming technology, cities would begin to explode in density and population. With that came the opportunity for different forms of work. With the majority of the population no longer needing to farm or labor, they could do modern jobs, thinking jobs. Of course, that was a decades-long process, but I was already preparing for it. Generating dozens of children companies was the first step in this diabolical plan of mine. My plan to bring information to the populace, and by consequence, make San Industries so unfathomably famous that even the most backwater village would know our names. Thankfully, an opportunity to push that agenda presented itself as soon as I returned. Polly's primary report was regarding our nagging neighbors on the front lines. Stronghold Echo was demanding that we make a show of ourselves and aid them. We could no longer put them off, so as soon as I was back, I let Polly send off the message and set the date. The pieces were quickly moved. We were going to send but a single combined arms regiment of 1,800 soldiers. They would reside within Stronghold Echo for a month, where they would participate in joint operations alongside Kingdom soldiers. Those in charge of Stronghold Echo had no idea that they didn't want this. They would sorely regret demanding our presence, and I would be laughing my ass off while watching the consequences. The best part was that I'd be attending this joint operation. I had been sitting in the lap of my own luxury for so long that I'd forgotten what it was like to lay in the dirt of a kingdom stronghold. I wanted to go back and take a peek at what it was like once again. I wanted to see things as their soldiers did. I wanted to remind myself, but primarily my soldiers, what it meant to be among the premier military force of this world. The joint operation came at the end of the month. Until then, I was taking care of anything that demanded my attention. Thankfully, there wasn't much because I had done a good job of decentralizing. I had trustworthy people who were good at their jobs, Polly especially. She took care of the base perfectly while I was gone, and so she'd be using her vacation time while we were conducting the joint operation. When the day finally came some weeks after we settled continuance, I was on a tank rolling to Stronghold Echo. Ugh, why did I have to get saddled with this? Major General Larissa rubbed her temples in stress, looking through the paperwork she had been sent several days prior. The list of accommodations Iron Legion was requesting, from hangar space and priority air traffic to living space and garage reservations. Despite there being over 100,000 troops at Stronghold Echo already, Iron Legion, with just 1,800 troops, would be taking a whopping 5% of the base's area and 25% of their hangars for accommodation. The general refused to believe their vehicles would take that much space, but the Iron Legion was unbending with their request. Just getting them to accept the offer for joint operation had taken this long. It had gotten to a point where Iron Legion simply refused to engage in correspondence for a time. Now, they were actually agreeing, and yet Larissa felt that the whole thing was just a plain bad idea. She had seen footage of Iron Legion battles, the few they had released, had seen the numbers they occasionally reported. Many of the generals around her were disbelieving, saying that it had to be fake, that they were putting out inflated numbers. Nobody had properly seen John Cooper's tanks in battle yet. Nobody had seen the new models of vehicles, planes, and helicopters in action. Despite John Cooper having said that his armament was still open for purchase, not only were extremely few generals considering purchase, but John Cooper also set a huge wait time for delivery. There hadn't been a single tank sold to the kingdom, not a single gunship, as he called them, not a single high-capacity bomber. Only things like their Chariot APCs and standard configuration planes were sold. That wasn't considering that Iron Legion was requiring that their products be sold with training. Once the tanks were finally put up for grabs and rolled out, they would have to send summoners to go train to be a tank captain, which would take even longer. Larissa guessed that John Cooper was trying to show off his armament before selling it, trying to prove its might on his own terms so that others couldn't discredit it. But today was the big day. Iron Legion was finally stepping beyond its area of isolation. Not only were they going to do battle alongside the kingdom for the first time, but by extension they were opening themselves up for evaluation and scrutiny. Yet they sent a mere 1,800 soldiers, backed by air support and logistics. Larissa wasn't sure if she should be impressed that they sent a sizable portion of their small army, or disappointed that it was just that, a small portion. 1,800 soldiers wasn't a drop in the bucket compared to what they already had stationed at Stronghold Echo. In a large-scale battle, 1,800 wasn't even a casualty rate. But when they had requested a force capable of facing at least 15,000 jointly with Kingdom forces, they didn't expect to get so little. They didn't even send a full general, just a few authority 10s and a brigadier general. It was why Larissa was placed in charge of handling them. The general refused to step out if they weren't going to send someone equal. He was rather insulted and now Larissa was paying for it. General. Larissa raised her head, turning to her assistant. They're on approach. I think you're going to want to see this. Why? Well, the assistant didn't respond, but Larissa was standing anyway. The two walked out of the headquarters and took a steed to the walls. There were thousands gathering on the ramparts, all looking into the distance, and more were gathering every minute. Larissa and her assistant disembarked and pushed their way up. Once they got a visual, they stared. 200 metal monstrosities were barreling their way, kicking up a sandstorm behind them. Even from a few miles away, Larissa could feel their presence. Completely unlike anything she had seen before, this group of soldiers wasn't even trying to hide the fact that they were there. If they were in the field, the Scourge would see them like a beacon. But perhaps to them, that didn't matter. It wasn't long before they reached the base, slowing down as they got closer to the walls. At the front of the convoy was a tank of colossal proportions. Larissa recognized the model, the M300 Super Heavy Battle Tank. The stacked cannons pointed straight at the walls made Larissa's stress levels spike. She had seen video of those things in action. If one fired, they'd blow a hole clean through the wall. But what pulled her gaze wasn't the menacing barrels or the way the rest of the tanks swiveled their turrets. It was the man standing on top of the lead tank. The sight of him made Larissa's stomach sink. Commander John Cooper, in the flesh. She grit her teeth. No wonder they didn't send a general. They sent the fucking face of Iron Legion itself, the man of too many titles to count. The world's greatest inventor, the war machine, the envoy of the dead, the world's richest commoner, the most powerful summoner. Hailing from the Magisterium's Calamity class, survivor of the fall of Purple Sky, survivor of the fall of the Treehouse and Stronghold Charlie. The man who's written nearly every new text on tactics and previously unknown forms of warfare. His accolades were as towering as his infamy. There wasn't anyone in the kingdom's military who didn't know his name, didn't know his feats of lethality. And he was looking right at her, as if he already knew who was assigned to Iron Legion matters. Larissa met his gaze and froze, unable to turn away despite everything in her body telling her to. She almost blanked out, could practically feel his aura combing over her brain, before she suddenly regained herself and saw him nod toward the gate. She scrambled, shouting, "Hurry up and open the gate." She ran down the walls while the guards pulled on those large chains. The super heavy tank slowly rolled through, barely clearing the height and width by a couple feet. John Cooper jumped down from the very top of the tank until he was right next to the bottom main cannon, staring at her as she stood there in front. She had never felt so tiny. For some reason, even idle, looking at the tank instilled a feeling of dread. She had learned to face brigadiers and marshals with a perfect poker face, feeling no fear before them lest she be mistaken as inept. She had led troops for over 2 decades, facing all manner of Scourge assaults on her prior station. But in front of this thing, she felt wholly insignificant. In front of the man who built them, she felt inferiority on a level she didn't know was possible. Brigadier General Larissa. "Yes, sir. If we could be shown to our accommodations." "Of course," she answered absent-mindedly, her assistant thankfully quick on her feet and running to bring the steed around. The two led the tanks to their staging grounds, John Cooper simply sitting on the armored surface and smoking a cigar. That's when Larissa noticed the woman next to him wearing an oversized hat sharing the cigar with him. She guessed it was Amara Teleria, the witch, famous for being John Cooper's fiancée. Not much else was known about her, but she was rumored to be even more powerful than her fiancé, a genius, gorgeous woman of mysterious spells and obscene firepower. When everyone started comparing warlocks and knights to a cold summoner was a mystery. The tanks, both super heavy and light, rolled onto a field previously cleared for them, filing themselves in and shutting down. Soldiers climbed out of them, primarily summoners with some warlocks and knights sprinkled in. Behind those tanks were a few dozen chariots and combat vehicles, including supply trucks for logistics. There were also aircraft in the sky and helicopters kicking up sand as they moved to land in the airfield. She had never seen most of the models before, unique variants that Iron Legion kept to themselves, most likely. She felt another headache coming on. Despite being only 1,800 strong, they brought more armor than the entire stronghold. A quick count showed Larissa 20 super heavy tanks and 150 light tanks, as well as 100 chariots. That wasn't counting the aircraft. She'd have a lot to report to the general, and he'd have to step out himself now. That was going to be another headache. She wasn't sure how John Cooper was going to act. She had heard many things about him. She wasn't sure which rumors to believe, and he was walking right toward her. She straightened up as he and his fiancée stopped in front of her alongside an agent. He smiled and put out his hand, her neck turning upward so she could see his face. Even his fiancée was tall. "I appreciate the welcome, General." "Of course, sir. We tried to prepare as much room as possible, but forgive us if it wasn't enough. I don't think anyone expected so much. Nobody ever expect the Spanish Inquisition." "Sorry." Larissa's brows raised, noticing Amara rolling her eyes with a small smile. John Cooper sighed. "Never mind. We'll make it work and take what we need to. I assume the General and Marshal will want to speak with me, so we can head there now." "Of course. Right this way." "Sure." He nodded, but didn't step to walk with her. Larissa took a few steps before stopping, looking at him weirdly. "Sir, you've got a raid coming, Larissa." "A raid? We have sensors several miles out that would trip alarms." "I'm sure you do." John lifted his wrist to his mouth. "Commander to all stations. Don't unpack yet, boys. We've got incoming." Larissa noticed everyone around the tanks freeze before suddenly climbing back into the tanks. Those that had shut down rapidly spun back up, and unlike before, enchantments suddenly went active across their armor, flashing with such dense mana that it made Larissa's skin tingle. The super heavy tanks moved first, starting to roll toward the exit, all others following. That's when Larissa's ear twitched. One alarm suddenly sounded across the base, and then all the others chimed seconds after. They blared the sound that indicated there was an incoming scourge force. It was nothing new. They faced attacks regularly, holding them back at the walls as was standard protocol. After all, they were a stronghold. Sending out tens of thousands of troops to do head-on battle was too costly for manpower and resources when it was unnecessary. It was better to simply fight on their own turf, especially now that they had their own shields to handle indirect fire from bombardos. But the tanks were rolling out to do battle outside the walls. Larissa couldn't help but panic. "Commander, we can handle sieges. There's no need for you to deploy." "Nonsense, General Larissa." He smiled at her, a wide grin of white teeth and cigar smoke. "It's a perfect opportunity to earn your confidence. And to be honest, the Iron Legion follows a different combat doctrine. I'm guesstimating the incoming force to be around 20,000 strong. Allow us to handle it. Maybe you'll get to report a non-existent mortality rate." "Sir," someone shouted after he finished talking, Larissa glancing up at a tank that was somehow slightly bigger than a super heavy tank, with only one cannon instead of two. Out of a hatch poked the head of the Brigadier General Larissa was supposed to handle. "Yes. What's the policy for this fight, sir?" "Glass the motherfuckers." Larissa's brows raised at the term, the Brigadier General smiling and saluting. "Yes, sir. Don't wait for me, General. You know what to do." The General nodded and sunk back into the tank, leading the charge as the tanks stormed through the gates. One of the super heavy tanks missed its alignment and knocked into the wall, demolishing a portion of it and knocking down one half of the gate. John clicked his tongue. "We'll pay for that. Anyway, why don't you come join us for a walk, General Larissa?" "A walk? Where?" "Outside the wire, of course. You're going to get front row seats to the show. Hope you have good boots." "Aye." Larissa watched him start walking off, glancing at her assistant, who shrugged confusedly. Then, the two followed behind. She pondered, wondering what he meant by glassing them. Before long, the Scourge started making their approach. Guards were posting the walls, and the tanks started setting themselves up. Larissa could see the Scourge flooding toward them, like a tidal wave of flesh. They were clustered together, running at them with wild abandon. Bombardos also appeared in the distance, coming over a sand dune and orienting themselves. But then, one of the tanks suddenly fired. The shockwave made Larissa's ears ring despite being a distance away. Yet she kept her eyes on the air and watched the projectile from the cannon sail across the atmosphere. It made impact with the abdomen of the bombardo several miles in the distance and exploded, turning the bombardo into an eruption of flesh and fire. It was utterly decimated, just like that. No fanfare, no charging knights, no deaths. Just a single projectile from that tank and dozens of lives were spared. It was so easy she almost didn't want to believe it. The other tanks started reorienting their cannons to face the incoming horde. It was clear now that the enemy was well within their range. The Scourge would have to charge through hellfire to even reach the stronghold. Larissa suddenly wasn't sure there would be any work for them to do, all because of a mere couple hundred tanks. And soon enough, she learned what John Cooper meant, what it meant to glass your enemies. That time an American was reincarnated into another world. Chapter 272, Mechanized Warfare. November 2nd, 626. Larissa's eyes flashed as the tanks before her went to full activation. Shields flared around them, and the enchantments glowed with such strength that she felt her very blood tingle with mana saturation. She, John Cooper, and Amara Talarius stood behind the command tank. From its hatch poked the head of the general, whose eyes were wide and dilated, a terse grin on his face. The scourge was charging, clustered and wholly unaware of what was before them. He screamed, his psyche carrying his voice. Fire! Larissa flinched as the tanks erupted with cataclysmic power. Fire bloomed from their cannons as projectiles were pushed out at uncountable speeds, the shockwaves from just the propelling explosions causing her to lose control of the air in her lungs. She had seen the videos of these things in action, but being before these towering metal behemoths, as a tiny woman of nothing but weak flesh, was an experience of such visceral intensity she couldn't have previously fathomed possible. She had seen warlocks and knights perform feats of godlike power, walking around like portable natural disasters. She had heard the legends, had seen the catastrophic results of high-authority combat. None of them could compare to this. Perhaps it was because she knew that it wasn't just magic. When she looked at the tanks, she could see both the magic imbuing them with power as well as the sharp display of engineering and science. What came out of that barrel wasn't just a ball of flames from a warlock spell. It was a heavy metal projectile carrying a high explosive payload. It flew through the air without guidance, and therefore it also demanded precision in the manufacture of the barrel itself. These tanks were sending the world's most powerful arrows through the sky at speeds she could only comprehend with a number, with accuracy demanding that the hundreds of people involved in its design and construction were each far smarter than a warlock throwing mana towards his enemies on a whim. So many moving parts, so many variables, so much money, all culminating in not just the war machine she stood behind, but the other couple hundred beside it. She watched as the projectiles exploded in the distance, bursting in the air and sending dense waves of superheated explosions to all the monsters around it. Larissa couldn't see the holes being punched in the lines of monsters, but she could hear and feel each of them, knowing that if she were anywhere close, she'd simply cease to exist. Forces like that wouldn't even leave ashes of her behind. Just a year or so ago, such explosively powerful magical items were nearly non-existent. Such power could only be displayed by the highest authority crystals, and those were always in the hands of warlocks and knights with similar power, supplementing them. Now, each of those projectiles was being fired by a summoner like her, people who were in those tanks because their intellect was more valuable than their brawn. A magical tool that did the fighting for you, protected you. Summoners were all seen as weak, and yet John Cooper had made these obscene weapons and saddled them with the very summoners that the rest of the world's magi felt provided no value to the fight against the scourge. When Larissa started feeling like she was going deaf, John Cooper took out a device and put it in her hand. Once activated, she felt a field bloom around her, dampening the sound. She could still hear every explosion, but it no longer made her ears feel like bursting. The general in the command tank screamed, pointing forward, the tanks starting to roll. They moved and fired, the scourge still cheering forward like they didn't see their kin being reduced to mist. "Walk with us," he spoke, Larissa and her assistant stepping as John and Amara moved. They walked with the tanks, which were rolling at around triple their speed. They pulled ahead, the scourge getting within range of the turrets. The turrets fired with tangible eagerness, bolts of flame sparking off the barrels at a rapid pace. The scattered monsters that started to get close were focus-fired and mauled, unable to even touch the shields. They simply followed John and his fiancée, who didn't seem to care that they were technically in the middle of a battlefield. Larissa had never been on a battlefield before. She certainly would have never guessed that these would be the circumstances of her first time. For several minutes, the tanks rolled forward, sometimes stopping to dump more fire into the incoming hordes. The chariots around the place were normally hanging behind, but as some scourge slipped past the wall of fire and piled on the tanks, they released their troops to cut down the aggressors. Sometimes, The turrets form other tanks would fire on their friendly armor in order to kill off the swarming scourge as if they were dusting off bugs. For a time, the only thing Larissa could see was fire. The detonating shells from the tank cannons started going off sooner, closer, as the scourge closed the distance. Amara put up a barrier to protect against the heat, knowing that it was more than hot enough, even at a distance, to scorch skin. Then, after walking a bit more, Larissa's foot crunched on something underneath. She looked down, lifting her boot to see fragments of opaque rocks. They were brownish-black, covered with sandy particles. She looked forward, seeing craters of murky glass, already cooled and reflecting the sunlight. They weren't large, but they were frequent, each explosion of the tank shells creating one. Bits of flesh were charred to the craters coming from corpses tougher than most, some other craters crushed and ground by the treads of tanks. Larissa struggled to imagine how much concentrated, instantaneous power was released with each explosion. She looked up as she heard something from behind. Above her head was a gunship, armed with 6 quad-barrel turrets that rained fiery hell upon the remaining hordes. Pods on their small wings occasionally launched long tubes that flew into the distance, targeting the royals lingering in the backlands. The bombardos had been eradicated first thing, so none of those remained. At some point, the tanks stopped firing and let the chariots take lead. They swept through the remaining scourge and deployed their warlocks and knights, 2 summoners on each heavy vehicle firing more turrets as they drifted across the battlefield. When the tanks finally came to a stop, no longer firing, John and Amara walked to the front. Larissa and her assistant gazed upon the glassy wasteland, previously their desert, stained with carbon and blood. The last of the scourge was wiped out, nothing but blasted corpses of the 20,000-strong army of monsters remaining. Larissa still felt some ringing in her ears, stunned into silence at how insane the battle was, how easy the battle was, all without a single casualty. "General Larissa," John called, Larissa turning her head to face him. He was still smoking that cigar, smiling, without a care in the world. The icon of engineered death raised his arms. "Welcome to mechanized warfare." The day passed. After I got everything arranged at Stronghold Echo, making sure my general was given all the deference I demanded, Amara and I were on a plane out of the base. That battle against the Scourge had been won with a 48% kill efficiency. It was decent, being this regiment's first fight detached from their larger whole, so I decided to cut the Brigadier General a break and just leave. Besides, it wasn't like I hadn't given him the green light to be a bit wasteful. That battle was more so about putting on a show. It had been won with a mere few injuries. Not a single Stronghold soldier had to step forward, and not a single one died. For the first time in their lives, they witnessed a victory against a Scourge army that was achieved without a single dead ally. It was unheard of. Because it was previously unheard of, none of those soldiers could fathom such a thing being possible. But now that I had shown them it was, they would associate the lack of death with my heavy metal. From now on, every battle they would face would be compared to what we showed them today, as well as every battle that regiment participated in henceforth. They'd start desiring a bit more preservation. They'd wonder why they couldn't use the same tools, why they couldn't go a battle without any deaths. They'd question their generals about why they couldn't have heavy metal of their own, and sooner rather than later, would question why the generals, and the military as a whole, refused to buy life-saving machines of war. My machines of war. It would force the kingdom to reconsider their approach to warfare, as if my Iron Legion's performance wasn't already doing that. And in the end, they'd be begging San Industries for armament. And I'd be a very happy camper. There was still a month left, and yet I could already feel the discontent brewing. The only issue I'd have to face in the near future was the media coverage. I was sure that the kingdom would be manipulating the press in order to keep themselves from looking bad. I would need to keep publicizing in order to fight that. Thankfully, San had already started a media company. So long as the Third Claw didn't make any drastic moves, it would serve my purposes for now. After arriving at the Black Spider Hotel, Amara and I settled into my room. We washed up, ordered dinner, and enjoyed ourselves for a while, cuddling on the couch and simply recovering. Out of the nearby window wall, we could see the dark night sky and the lights of the city all around. Taking peeks outside made me melancholic, so I turned my attention to the advancement formation in my hand. Amara laid on my chest, her grimoire closed next to us. When my advancement formation flashed in the air, she looked up and took a couple glances at it. How far along are you? I feel like you haven't had any time to work on it. I haven't, but I've still managed to get about halfway. Being able to remember everything perfectly is obnoxiously useful. Not to mention that our time on continuance pushed my comprehension forward a major step. That's good. How long until you reach Authority 8? Hard to say. I looked over the formation, staring at the arrays I hadn't yet understood, but was working on. It could be another year if I remain this busy. I'm not able to study for hours every day anymore. There's always something to do, even if I've delegated much of the work. But advancement should take a higher priority. I think you need to start setting things aside. Take at least 3 hours every day. I agree. Thankfully, things are starting to settle. I'll have more time anyway. Won't be hard to work things out. I sighed and crunched a few more arrays. For now, my advancement was still smooth sailing. But I could still see that great golden wall along the horizon, somehow even through the walls of my room. A perpetual barrier that I had only seen once elsewhere. While Nanan was killing that king blood, I had a faint idea of how to break the barrier because of that. I would also get a better idea in time. But if I were to be the first summoner to ever break that barrier, I need to be careful, because that was assuming even the mantle had failed to produce any summoner that could break it. I would need to, therefore, surpass the best of their legacy before I could hope to break that wall. It would be no easy task, but I was arrogant enough to believe I could. After I turned that into confidence, I'd be set for paving my path. Because Maxwell's advancement formations would stop after I reached Authority 10. I knew it was foolish to pressure myself with that future, especially with how far away it seemed. But we were already approaching a year since the fall of the treehouse, and it was as fresh in my mind as today's new experiences. I could feel myself losing track of time, despite every minute feeling like a day. In fact, I was no longer thinking in terms of time frames. Each day was a series of events and tasks to be completed one after the other. Each successive millisecond, another set of data to be burned into my brain alongside the countless others. This was to say that Authority 8 would be here before I knew it, because even I could get distracted by the thousands of occurrences I had an interest in each day. Dare I say, I had actually forgotten for a time that advancing should be my top priority. Of course, I knew the value of creating the Iron Legion and industrializing San Industries, but I had let myself get caught up in the fine details for too long. I had people for that. I needed to stop focusing on the dots of the wall painting that was the big picture and take some steps back. I combed some of Amara's hair absent-mindedly, stroking her scalp and feeling her relax a bit more. I needed to advance as well as handle my own personal technological advancement. I needed to handle things with the heart at continuance and integrate the new neural gem from that death shrine into another, more refined seer knife. While the analysis of the heart would likely end up falling into the hands of the Wonderland teams we sent over to the island, everything else was a personal project I'd need to spend time on. Thankfully, my Psyche could extend my lucid and active hours well beyond a full day. I didn't have any combat on the horizon, so chances were I'd be able to allocate my energy elsewhere. If I really focused my efforts, Authority 8 would be here sooner. I was looking forward to it. Authority 7 had already handed me modern weaponry, advancing the era of available spirits by decades. If it kept up, Authority 8 should be reaching beyond even the most cutting edge of what I knew on Earth. That was also considering Quan and Song were for my future on Earth. The Scourge didn't leave much room for variation in terms of weapons. A bullet was a bullet, and empowerment equalized my summons, so there was often little need to reach beyond my core loadouts. Totenstall remained my most powerful weapon and would likely continue to. His volume of fire would be unparalleled until I managed to get my hands on a minigun, if that day ever came. But in the modern era, warfare changed. Technology got good enough to provide soldiers with more than just a gun, some camo, and a ceramic plate over their chest. While I didn't need things like night vision, there were creative pieces of personal gear that would, in fact, help me if the tech was growing where I expected it to. It would be auxiliary, but in this magical world without modern conveniences, I would take anything I could get. That also reminded me, I needed to work on the ability to pass off summons to others. I'd like to see my fiancée in some combat gear someday. My eyes glanced at Amara, who was starting to drool on my chest, and I turned back to my advancement formation, filling the air with psychic arrays. That time an American was reincarnated into another world. Chapter 273, Heart in 2. I just realized. What? Today marks the end of my first year since being deployed out here. Vetsmon tightened down the harness around his body, making sure his jetpack was snug. Other raiders were already lining up. There was turbulence despite the plane having shields. Vetsmon able to sense the spell fire detonating around them. It was a new species the Scourge was rolling out, and unfortunately, they had to be the first to encounter them. 30 to drop. There was a yell, Vetsman's eyes turning as the hatch of the plane dropped. He stood, walking to the front of the line and peering over the edge. He could see the battlefield. Thousands of Templars were forcing back the Scourge, the land a sea of blood and fire in his vision. This singular battle had been ongoing for days now. Vetsmon himself was exhausted, having repeatedly fought the most powerful royals on the island. But today it would all end. Their mission this time was simply a drop into the heart of the Scourge's final resistance, the last nexus. The year-long war for this landmass would be won with this decisive blow. Vetsmon suddenly saw the green light, looking back at those with him. The Order's best. All of them raiders from Tier 1 teams and quite used to being thrown into the most dangerous situations known to man. After being equipped with weapons and gear of vastly improved utility, courtesy of John Cooper, their effectiveness as a strike force was unmatched by any other throughout the Order's history. Despite only approaching Authority 9, Vetsmon still found himself on this team. He was surrounded by those almost exclusively stronger than him, including marshals and brigadiers. His enemies would be just as strong. One of the marshals stepped up next to him, looking down and nodding. The end of the first phase. Let's get this shit over with so we can go back home. His voice crackled over comms, the sign of mana interference, before stepping off and plummeting through the sky. Vetsmon followed, everyone behind him throwing themselves through the hatch. His arms and legs were tucked as he felt the wind against his armor. Nearby anti-air spell fire from Scourge exploded around them, impacting against his armor with waves of fire and earthen shrapnel. He could see the back line of the Scourge, dense with royals and towering behemoths. There were bombardos slinging shells of poisonous miasma into the ranks of marching Templars, tanks, and armored vehicles. Planes were dropping bombs by the hundred and scorching the earth with fire while demolishing battle lines every time the Scourge tried to shore them up. The flag of the Holy See was waved across the Templar front. Some were scorched, others torn, but none had fallen. Despite the battle being worthy of the next generation's history books, mortality rates were at an all-time low. Vetsmon knew that the Order had prepared for far worse. Not even they could have predicted how effective John Cooper's inventions would be. This war would be studied for years to come, already considered a turning point in the existential fight against the Scourge. Vetsman's jetpack flared with fiery thrust, slowing his descent, but not too much. He found one of the 50-meter-tall behemoths stomping around within the walls of the Nexus nest, redirecting himself and cutting his jetpack at the perfect moment. He plummeted straight through the behemoth, its thick chitin armor unable to handle the impact. His armor locked up with the contact, and when he hit the floor, he felt his legs nearly buckle, a few of his muscles and tendons straining. Far better than the last time he pulled this stunt. His vigor was already circulating with every heartbeat, a bit of adrenaline kicking him awake as he brought out his sword and shield amidst a pile of flesh. The behemoth was still alive despite having a Vetsman-sized hole through its spine, but being mission-killed, the man simply stepped out. He'd let it suffer. The rest of his team made their impacts, some doing just as he did and taking out behemoths and royals with their mass. The enemies around them barely knew what was going on, thinking it's some new human weapon. The adaptive camouflage was working. As each of the raiders rose from the dust of their hot drop, they looked around and suddenly moved. Vetsmon found a target for himself, as did all the others. Amidst the towering spires and nests of unholy abominations and Scourge spawn, he saw the blaring beacons of venomous power, sitting around Authority 10. There were dozens of them, and the Templars were still breaking through the walls of the Nexus. They were all alone in the heart of the enemy, just as the mission called for. A monster jumped at Vetsmon, his hand shooting out and grabbing its head before crushing it with his fingers. He dropped the corpse, seeing a field of hellspawn. They were all weak, mere breeders, slaves, and their offspring. Vetsmon raised his sword, slashing in a wide arc before him. A wave of vigor was released, glistening white, and it washed over every helpless spawn and slave. Powerless before his might, They were slaughtered and evaporated with just a single attack. But there were more. There always were. Seeing one of the breeding nests, Vetsmon bounded over and landed atop the writhing mound of flesh. He took out a charge and planted it before jumping off. After a handful of seconds, the charge suddenly drove itself into the mound with an explosion, digging deep into the nest's heart before detonating with enough power to send the entire nest airborne as nothing but chunks and droplets of vaporizing blood. He marched through the breeding fields, quickly getting surrounded by royals of all authorities. Most were more powerful than him, all the weaker ones doing battle with the Templars. He handled them as he always did. With overwhelming strength and resilience, he slaughtered every royal that dared step into his path. In the distance, Vetsmon could hear the battles of the other squads. All of them, like him, were spreading out and finding their own targets. They were there for nothing more than absolute destruction and carnage. As the premier of the church's military, the most powerful soldiers in the world, it was their job to slaughter the most dangerous of the scourge so the Templars could march forth with impunity in numbers. That included the 2 sovereign royals on the island. One had been killed just a month ago in a precision strike. The other had escaped and was hiding within the tower at the center of the nexus. Vetsmon's gaze turned after he cut through another royal, seeing a king blood charge toward him. It was from the Anarchy bloodline, wielding multiple weapons with no sense of self-preservation, standing at 4 meters tall. The incoming royals backed off quickly, not willing to get in the way of that monster. Vetsmon found it convenient. There'd be no interruptions. It was Authority 10. Just a year ago, Vetsmon couldn't imagine himself fighting against an Authority 10 King blood. He was still only Authority 8, on the verge of advancing, having yet to receive a single crown or invocation. Those would come after this battle, after he advanced to Authority 9. The crown he would receive then would be among the best. Until then, he would remain far weaker than the enemy charging toward him. But in front of such powerful foes, it wasn't his job to kill. He charged forward with his shield at his greatest speed, covering 200 meters of ground in seconds. The King blood charged with just as much ferocity, and the two collided head-on. Vetsmon felt his entire body jolt, the impact of muscle, metal, and vigor creating a shockwave that would have rang Vetsmon's ears if not for his helmet. Yet despite being outclassed in power, he wasn't outclassed in mass. His armor, several times heavier than himself, and his shield, almost as heavy as his entire set of armor, gave him the advantage against a foe anybody else at his level would only despair to see. The King blood crumpled against his bulwark and was launched away. It flew through the air with a gut-churning roar. Vetsmon glanced at an indicator in his vision, fuzzy due to the amount of corrupted magicka in the air, but still legible. A spell formed behind the King blood as it was about to hit the ground. A fraction of a second later, razor-sharp spikes drove from the earth and skewered the King blood like it didn't descend from anarchy. Its arms were nearly torn from its body, its torso a mass of thorns and blades. Blood poured down the spikes, the King blood's 2 heads frozen in shock. Then the spikes exploded, the fragments reducing the King blood's body to gore. Killed with a single well-placed spell. Vetsmon glanced over and saw one of his brigadiers standing in combat, 2 other King bloods attacking him. No words exchanged, Vetsmon turned and ran off toward another power signature. He found more enemies of his power level, behemoths, royals, and King bloods alike. Many times, he'd encounter enemies far more powerful than himself, yet there would always be support. He'd never have to fight them alone for too long. Thanks to the magic of technology and aura, everyone was aware of every enemy within the Nexus. All Vetsmon had to do was send out a signal, and the nearest raider would spare him a spell or blade after some time. He just had to stall any enemy he couldn't outright kill, but it wasn't without cost. He bounded across the unholy grounds of hell and dropped charges and bombs where he needed to while fighting his enemies. He killed almost every scourge spawn he came across, wiping them out by the 100,000. It enraged every monster around him, and that was exactly what he wanted. He would inflict as much physical and psychological pain as possible, and he would do it joyfully. This went on for many minutes. He and the others from the Order had leveled a quarter of the Nexus with their battles by the time the Templars started swarming in through the outermost walls and torching everything to the ground. Everything was going as expected, and that's when Vetsmon encountered it. It wasn't the Sovereign overseeing the Nexus. It was an Authority 11 King Blood. Vetsmon could see its light before he saw its figure. He felt his aura pulled into it, but the devices his armor was geared with created a sharp barrier between them. Then he saw the beautiful silver armor crest a mound of corpses, the being within it turning its head to him. He stood his ground, his heart pounding in anxiety as the light poured over the area. He heard the alarms of the aura devices on his armor start to overload and fry as the king blood of unholy light lifted its sword. The blade was stabbed down into the corpses below it, liquid radiance washing over them, transforming them. Screams of the damned echoed straight into Vetsman's mind. The mound of flesh rose, the king blood stepping off as a gargantuan monster of organs, bones, and twisted muscle crawled to its feet. Vetsmon tried to contact someone, but he only got errors as the device failed. The light locked down every kind of magic in the area. He was cut off. He trusted that someone would get to him in time, but until then, he was on his own. He grit his teeth as the king blood simply watched him. Then the flesh monster moved, lunging toward him with uncharacteristic agility. It brought down a fist of screaming mouths and teeth, Vetsman's mind being bombarded with the agonizing voices of those he loved. In response, he simply raised his shield, flesh splattering across the metal. He was still brought down to a knee, a swing of the sword releasing enough vigor to blow the arm away and give him respite. He stood back up before charging at the chimera, deflecting another attack with his shield before slashing and stabbing with his sword. Enough vigor poured off of him to wipe out several Authority 9 royals, and yet it only left mortal wounds on the monster. He cut off its arms, which writhed with despairing cries. It continued slamming into him, bone spurs leaving dents in his shield and armor, the sheer weight and strength, fueled by the corrupted biological magic of unholy light, causing his limbs to shake. He held himself together even as muscles pulled and bones trembled. He felt blood in his mouth from the waves of impact having shaken his organs. The pain only woke him up, more adrenaline surging through his body. He used the weight of his shield to slam the chimera back, sending it to the floor before hacking away at it with his sword and emissions of vigor. His arms nearly tore with the strain of swinging his long sword, which had enough weight to surpass war hammers and maces. There was little technique behind it. Vetsmon knew that he couldn't compare to masters of the blade. He also knew that he didn't need to. He had strength, and with it he surpassed the need for excessive thought behind his actions, especially against monsters like this. The chimera's light started to dim after Vetsmon had reduced it to pieced-apart limbs and chunks. Then, when he delivered a killing blow to its central mass, the light vanished. That's when he turned to the king blood, which merely watched the entire fight. Vetsmon knew he didn't have to worry about it attacking him from the back. These beings thought themselves so prideful, so superior, that there was no need for backstabbing tricks. They didn't have honor. They just had complacency, backed by incredible strength, of course. They liked to play with their prey. They liked to watch them suffer, to watch them despair. In fact, the unholy light bloodline corrupted humans through their fights. Vetsmon had been in some of those fights recently. He had learned their mannerisms, their techniques. He also learned how painful a fight with one of these monsters could be. His heart rate spiked as the king blood flourished its own sword, feeling a large scar on his body ache. His eyes glanced around, still seeing nothing but the nearby field of blood and flesh and the cage of light he was stuck in. He wondered where his help was, wondered if this king blood was actually managing to hide itself from the others. Or perhaps other king blood surfaced, forcing the others into long fights. Both could be true, as well. But when Vetsmon saw the king blood charge him, he knew he was in for the worst. He swung his sword with all his strength, meeting the king blood strike. Both swords were stopped at the clash, a couple muscles in Vetsman's arm tearing. The king blood followed up with another strike that seemed to snake around his arm. He moved his shield, barely managing to block. The metal fractured, a large crack appearing on its surface. Vetsmon felt his forearm fracture with the impact, but his shield didn't drop. He leaned with the blow to dampen it, just slightly, but then the king blood raised its foot and kicked. He went flying, another dent in the shield. After flipping and recovering, he stood his ground and barely managed to catch sight of the king blood before it brought down its sword upon him. He lifted his shield and the blade cut into its edge. Vetsmon used that, twisting the shield and bringing down the king blood. He ditched his sword, a knife appearing in his hands which he drove straight into the King Blood's armor with all the speed he could muster. The tip of the knife, made out of an Authority 10 fire mana crystal, detonated with the most explosive spell in the Order's arsenal. The force blew the two away from each other, Vetsmon tumbling across the ground for a few dozen yards before managing to recover. He looked up at the King Blood, already standing. It looked down at its armor, blown apart to reveal smooth white flesh, now bloodied and torn apart. It looked like nothing more than a superficial wound. Vetsmon knew the damage was more extensive than that, despite the look. He could feel it himself. He glanced down as his cracked armor suddenly fell off his body. He could feel some of his ribs scream, now in pieces. His head was dizzy as blood poured down his nose, and his hand was mangled, 3 fingers missing, several bone fractures and several limbs. His organs felt liquefied, and he could barely see straight. His shield was on the floor somewhere, as was his sword, and now he had no life-saving knife. But he saw blood stream from the helmet of the King Blood, and he smiled despite the pain. He stood straight, taking out a plain metal knife long enough to be called a sword by any ordinary man. The King Blood charged toward him, far faster than before. All Vetsmon could feel after that was the hot sensation of a sword pushing through his chest. He felt his heartbeat cease as his heart was sliced in two. He looked up at the King Blood, his knife buried in its stomach where he had wounded it before. It drove its sword deeper, the power of unholy light attempting to infiltrate his body. He just smiled behind his helmet, the rest of his vigor infused into every cell of his body. The pain of the King Blood's attempted corruption made him feel like fainting. His grip on the knife slipped, light surrounding his body and filling his vision, pouring into his wound. Vetsmon wasn't sure how much longer he was in that state until his body was suddenly thrown to the side. The light dissipated around him, the King Blood retreating as another raider entered the fray. Vetsmon focused his blurry vision and saw one of the marshals. It was one of the women, a lady triple Vetsmon's age, someone who had been swinging her spear on the battlefield longer than he had been alive. The King Blood retaliated to her attacks, but she was as oppressive as Vetsmon knew her to be. Her attacks demanded the King Blood's full force, which was many times greater than what was used against Vetsmon. The shockwaves of magic and vigor were enough to rend the ground, cracks shaking the earth with the release of pressure. Vetsmon backed himself away, a new hole in his chest after he ripped out the sword, causing even more damage than before. He felt the incredible sensation of being unable to breathe, unable to speak. Only the occasional faint agonizing groan escaped his mouth while he pulled himself to his feet. Despite being able to see his heart, though, no blood was spilled. Even his nose and mouth were no longer seeing blood. He simply stood there, holding the ruined pieces of his body together as the marshal continued her onslaught. Their battle was monumentally flashy thanks to the King Blood. Its magic filled the skies with miasma, and it took everything the marshal had to resist. She drained its energy wound after wound, magic spilling with its blood, and its movements growing sluggish after many minutes. Her armor was scorched and rent, just as Vetsmon's was. It didn't just have magic, but masterful swordsmanship. Their pride was shown through their battles, but Vetsmon could see the King Blood begin to panic as it started dying. It went into a frenzy after the marshal suddenly took an arm. She deflected most attacks, but its reckless fear and insane desire to kill that which wounded it was difficult to resist. She was pushed on the back foot, the rolls flipping. Spellfire bombarded her from all sides, and yet she couldn't worry about it with the King Blood constantly cutting at her with its blade. Vetsmon watched her take on several wounds, her leg nearly coming off after it caught her by surprise. But she never lost her cool, never faltered, continued looking for an opening. The wound Vetsmon left tore open further, spilling more blood. She waited, and with a decisive blow, thrust her spear into that wound and slashed. The King Blood was bisected as an unfathomable amount of vigor was released. It took on the form of a scythe, slicing across the King Blood's waist in Vetsmon's vision as if the spear wasn't doing the cutting. That was coalescence, the pinnacle of knightly combat. After finishing off that monster with a beheading, the marshal stood still, breathing heavily with strained lungs. Only after some time did she turn and walk over to Vetsmon, evaluating him with her gaze as if she didn't care that she could see the 2 pieces of his heart and lungs. Vetsmon could see the depth of her wounds, her breathing hoarse and her gait unsteady. After taking a second, She waved. Vetsmon followed her as she walked over to a nearby pile of rubble from a building and sat down. He did the same, the two sitting there as the surrounding battle finished. Fuck, I'm beat. Vetsmon just nodded, still unable to speak. Every moment was agonizing, but if all his training was for anything thus far, it was this. He just honed his aura, making sure he didn't fall apart. The marshal popped some pills into her mouth and stuffed her wounds, cringing as the poisonous light was purged from her body. She spit out a mouthful of blood, coughing a few times. Fucking hurts. Those bastards always know how to make you suffer. God forbid a battle with one is relatively smooth. Vetsmon frowned a bit, wondering why she was complaining about pain in front of him. It felt like she was trying to egg him on. After many more minutes of the two sitting there and recovering, they heard the death throes of the sovereign. The Templars then marched in, swarming the city by the 10,000 and eradicating everything they came across. Every last scourge spawn, every last nest, every last royal and monster was slaughtered mercilessly. Every Templar, every armored vehicle, and every inch of ground was stained with blood, the stench unbearable to any who hadn't been living in it for the past several months. A figure started walking toward them, Vetsmon raising his head and seeing Anderson. The man was smiling, as always, and didn't have a speck of dirt on his clothes. He wasn't even wearing his armor. Oh my, would flashing me your heart be as bad as flashing me your tits? Dirty little heathen. Vetsmon stayed silent, trying to say even a single word and failing. Anderson just laughed, smacking his shoulder and sending another wave of pain through his body. Don't look so pained, Vetsmon. For this, not only did I get your crown and invocation approved, but I also got you leave. You're gonna see that sneaky girlfriend of yours over at Iron Legion. Perhaps you want to consider giving her a baby. You know, in case the crown sterilizes you. I know they say that they've solved that issue with the invocations, but hell, I'm still skeptical. Not that some soldiers haven't done their due diligence testing that theory. He chucked to himself while walking away, a healer rushing over to Vetsmon with bulging eyes. Vetsmon just smiled. He had fought long and hard. Now he'd get to see them again. It had been too long. He wondered how strong John was now. There was no way he hadn't advanced after all this time. That time an American was reincarnated into another world. Chapter 274, Authority 8. November 4th, 627. It's about damn time. I smiled at Maxwell after he opened the door with his friendly greeting. His study was still as impressively rich as always. Hey, old man. You're calling me old? You're the one who's taking forever to advance, moving like pond water. Your friends are leaving you behind. So maybe you should stop playing general and study more. Playing general? I'm running a continental private military force that's single-handedly forcing back an entire scourge front, as well as the industrial company responsible for supplying my forces and the kingdoms with catastrophic weapons. I've been getting pulled 1,000 different ways for the last 2 years, and I'm hearing a whole lot of excuses. I smirked as Maxwell turned to Amara, who was standing there with her white hair tied up in a braid. Afternoon, little lady. Good afternoon, Sir Alberain. Thanks in advance for taking care of John. Don't thank me. You're the one who's gonna marry him, you poor soul. It's not too bad. If I ever get annoyed, I just go spend all his money. And so you've cracked the secret to a harmonious marriage. Come in and sit. John, you go plant your ass. Amara beamed with a chuckle while I moved to the tempering chair. The advancement orb appeared in my hand, as did the large crystal. Today, I would take the step to Authority 8. It had taken almost 2 years and would have come faster if I hadn't been so unbelievably busy. Even then, the fact that it took only 2 years was a testament to my talent. Others could easily take double or triple that time while dedicated to advancement, and for some, their talent would only barely help them reach my level after a couple decades. I suddenly thought of Rayla. Previously the most powerful person I knew of after arriving in this world, her talent barely allowed her to slip into Authority 8. Even then, her combat power was lacking for a talented Authority 8. She certainly couldn't even begin to compare to someone like Amara. I was pretty sure she wasn't enlightened, and therefore didn't have the vast foundation someone like Amara was gifted with. That wasn't to mention my knowledge and the spells Amara developed with it. And now, I would be reaching her level on paper. Even thinking back on what I had seen of her power, I had long ago surpassed it. Authority 8 wouldn't be the large leap that Authority 7 had been. I wouldn't be creating a new spark, but I would multiply the size of my reservoir of Psyche and get the opportunity to restructure some of my mind palace. The most important part was the massive amount of Psyche I'd be bringing in. It was the first preparatory step toward what I'd have to do during my advancement to Authority 10. Maxwell walked around me, slotting in the white crystals around the chair. Are you ready? Let me see the formation. I silently raised my hand, the formation blooming with perfect recreation. I had already made it thousands of times before this, cultivating all of them without flaw. Maxwell took a long look at it before nodding. Good. I assume you're already prepared for the advancement itself and what you'll be doing with your mind palace, so I'll start the condensation now. I nodded, the crystals around me activating and dumping their magicka into the area around my body. I felt the familiar pressure on my soul. It was comfortable for a while, like being wrapped in a warm, heavy blanket. It surpassed that soon after. It wasn't painful, just a little stifling. It was difficult to move my Psyche around without pushing it away from my body. I took a few deep breaths, my eyes closed as my mind calmed. I had been preparing for this day for months now. I hadn't gone into work for a week now. Everything either put off for another day or simply delegated to someone else. I was busy relaxing myself and scheming, not just for my advancement, but for what I'd need to do afterward. I felt my skin tingle as the area reached full saturation. Although the pressure had to be colossal compared to my last advancement, it didn't feel all that bad, probably because of the things I'd been through since then. After feeling suitably primed, I let my Psyche flow. The advancement formation unfolded in my mind, arrays and clusters manifesting before connecting to each other at thousands of different points. Like many times before, it was finished without flaw after about 80 seconds. That's when I felt my Psyche flow through my brain, the formation bending it in such a manner that it expanded my power in a way never before known. It triggered something in my soul, and once the process started, it couldn't be stopped. I suddenly felt myself open, like a void had bloomed in the center of my chest. The magicka around me started flooding in. The vast majority of it was converted to Psyche as it went through my advancement formation. But some remained as mana and vigor, tempering my body with its density and elevating my flesh to another level. Within my mind palace, I saw some of the infrastructure shake. The sheer density of the power entering my body stressed the very foundations. But if it didn't break, it would temper. The titanium of the walls around my fortress were strengthened, and the weapons upon them were empowered. The facilities within my fortress were refined. I did away with extraneous items, revamped my fabrication plant, tidied up the command center, and reorganized the data center with my sparks. Everything was streamlined. Power flowed with greater clarity and volume. Exactly what I needed for this advancement. As that all happened, the vortex of power above and below the palace grew in intensity and size. Its bulk tripled in size with the initial influx of power, then doubled again over the subsequent several minutes. After finishing the renovations on the palace, I saw that its density had tripled on top of that. It was an effective 18 times increase in sheer power. With more power came a far vaster ability to not just empower my summons, but extend my longevity. Just the raw numbers meant that I could fight 18 times longer in a battle, or dump 18 times the power into my summons over the same duration. However, a larger pool meant that I also regenerated that much more over the same amount of time. With enough pacing, my overall combat effectiveness went up much more than just 18 times. The increase in power by itself was incredible. I could already fight Authority 8s on equal grounds before. Killing Authority 9s had been done as well after taking advantage of the nature of my weapons and the complacency of the scourge I had faced. Now, I was finally rising to the upper echelon of this world's combat hierarchy. On the exponential power distribution curve, I now had the combat ability to face everything but the pinnacle. There was no reason I couldn't do significant damage to Authority 10s, especially after I reached into my 8th dimension for new weapons. I wouldn't be arrogant enough to think I could challenge all of them, especially those that had reached beyond the Great Barrier. Not all Authority 10s were created equal. It was a major divider for a reason, but there would be no doubting my power now. Short of that great divide, I would be the lethality king. Yet this was just the first step of 3. I watched as my body was completely saturated, my mind becoming that much more powerful with the influx of Psyche. Although my thinking speed only increased half as much as the density of my Psyche did, my capacity to handle mental tasks skyrocketed. I'd probably be able to stay awake for a few weeks straight if I weren't in battle. This advancement was merely a primer, though. Authority 10 would be the creation of my third spark, though not as it had been before. It was supposed to combine my two sparks into one, solidifying not just two concepts of my mind, but my mind as a whole. This would do more than just give me a mimicry of an auxiliary intelligence. I would be gaining, at minimum, a second mind as a whole. Maxwell's call was incredible. He had earned his title as a genius thoroughly. After this advancement, I would be placing myself just below the greatest summoners throughout this world's history. Then I'd surpass them before even reaching Authority 10, let alone beyond that. But the things I'd gain beyond the sheer power would set me above them by magnitudes. This advancement was priming me for Authority 10. I would need even more power than this, which was what Authority 9 would give me. So while the improvement to my cognitive abilities would be put on the back burner, the amplification to my psycho pool would be incomprehensible to any other summoner that dared compare themselves to me. I couldn't imagine what would happen to me during that advancement to Authority 10. Hopefully, I'd be figuring out how to break down the Great Barrier around that time, and then doing so. But if Nanin was any indication, my power needed to be far greater if I wanted to attempt that. Far greater than what even this amazing advancement was giving me. After what had to be at least 2 hours, my power finally started settling, some of my consciousness returning to the real world. I felt my body's strength, a good step more powerful than before. I could feel the mana in my blood and vigor in my muscles. I may not be quite able to go blow for blow with a normal Authority 5 knight, but it was infinitely better than being ordinary. I smiled and looked down at my hand, gazing at the crest of the 13 stars. High above my mind palace, I could see the same stars, 7 of which were lit. I glanced across the ears of weapons I had gone through up until now, and my eyes stopped at the 8th star, my 8th dimension. With a thought, the barrier into it was shattered, the influx of power overwhelming it. The star lit up, and I was greeted with the sight of a new era of warfare. My smile widened, my heart beating in excitement. I knew ever since I had spoken to Quan in song that I may not be limited to my knowledge of how Earth had been when I left. Time was not linear between our worlds. Even if it was, though, it had been several years since I had come to this world. Technology was already growing at an exponential rate, and weapons technology was at the forefront. It wouldn't have been surprising to see this kind of tech even under the paradigm of my prior ignorance. But the sheer refinement of what I was seeing meant that I had jumped another era, as I had every authority before. Heh, hee hee. I started laughing, failing to stifle my joy. Amara tilted her head at me, Maxwell frowning. What's got you laughing like a psycho, boy? I've told you that the world I came from has technology you can't fathom. Now, what if I told you that I've just gained access to some of the technology that I couldn't previously fathom? Well, I refuse to believe that your technology is that much more complex than our magic, so I think that's just an inability on your part. On some level, you're right. Pound for pound, I think their complexities would punch the same. It's just in this world, there are singular people who handle that complexity by themselves. On Earth, you had the collective efforts of hundreds of millions advancing all facets of all subjects and niches. I can't wait to see what will happen when this world hits the same threshold and acquires the benefit of both worlds. But for now, I'm the only one that wields both, and when I say you can't quite fathom what this technology represents, I mean it. I stood out of my seat, calling upon several summons from my 8th dimension. The first was a full body suit. It was open when it manifested behind me, my foot stepping into the foot assembly. It closed around my boot as I stepped back, letting myself lean into its mechanical embrace. My other foot was encapsulated and my legs were clamped down on by a metal skeleton. I could feel hundreds of different parts shift as the suit adjusted to my proportions. When the torso closed around me and my arms were locked into their positions, I sensed the rest of the armor deploy. There were a couple dozen plates that adjusted around my limbs, different polymers and alloys that gave complete protection while being durable enough to take on more than just a blow or two before demanding replacement. At first, I felt the suit move of its own accord, completing its adjustments and deployments. The armor was thick, heavy, and bulky, all of it hiding exceedingly complex skeletons of conduits, servos, suites of sensors, and redundancies. I looked down at my hand, which was now covered by a textured glove. Above the knuckles of my fingers were metal appendages that bent with my form. Above my palms were either metal or rubbery textured surfaces that allowed me to use the fine motor dexterity of my fingers while also providing protection and utility. The suit felt like its own entity. I could barely bend my fingers, not just because the suit was restricting me while booting, but because it was bearing its own weight for me. That weight was the reason modern personal armor wasn't built like a tank. This suit was the solution to that problem. I finally felt the power kick in with an audible click. After a second or two, my limbs fell, my muscles finally able to move and manipulate the machine like my own body. I balled my hand into a fist, no longer feeling resistance, before summoning a helmet that went with this suit. It was a full head cover, similar to the helmets I had made for my Iron Legion. There was a visor across the front and a thick, but precisely machined metal cover everywhere else. I lifted it and slid it over my head. A polymer around the neck sealed to a base on the suit, providing full environmental isolation. Then, the HUD kicked on. The visor in front of my eyes lit up with a logo resembling the 13 stars of my crest. I saw it boot with hundreds of lines of logging code before flickering with activity. Like a video game, I saw a weapon indicator, a biometric indicator, a small map, a compass, and some identifier tags that hovered over Maxwell and Amara. Not yet configured, but showing me their distance and whatever biometrics it could pick up from them, such as heart rate, skin temp, and possible intentions based on their body language. As that happened, I noticed the spirit of the suit and helmet start to infuse memories into my mind. I could see the training manuals, dated for the year 2049, which meant the tech was some years older than that, and the manual was likely being viewed some years after the manual was dated, probably in the 2050s. The name of the suit was in the title. The Armored Personnel Powered Exosuit, Model AP-77, Assault Configuration. The assault configuration was dressed for frontal combat. Moderately armored compared to its heavier counterparts, but retaining enough mobility to almost entirely eliminate the burden of weight and make a man feel superhuman. It was the flagship of the second generation of exosuit programs and the first mass-produced model for the American military. The same exoskeleton in this suit could be dressed down in other configurations, but looking in my 8th dimension, I couldn't see any other options. Not that I was complaining. I'd likely be able to find them later. The suit had heavy plates of some kind of alloy. The soldiers wearing it only needed to know that it was metal and could take plenty of blows from plenty of bullets. With the armor itself and all its burden being taken on by the exosuit instead of the body, it was possible to implement armor previously unwearable. Between all the gaps was a polymer seal for full body protection. Around that were a few layers of soft armor topped with some standard camouflage fabric that either covered or accented the armor plates. Topping all that was another layer of pockets and utility. A holster for a sidearm, a chest rig for holding magazines, pouches for grenades and tools, knife sheaths, and more. It was definitely bulky. For me, who was used to everything being stored in spatial rings and wearing nothing but my slim coat, it would be a lot to adjust to. Not that I wouldn't happily make the jump. Once the exosuit was fully booted, I moved my limbs around. According to some of the logs I saw flash across my eyes, the system tried to run a diagnostic and configuration in order to adapt the suit's behavior to my own, but was halted. I could only assume that the spirit of this exosuit had something to do with it. These summons were not perfect recreations of the forms they took on. They were the ideal recreation, quite literally the spirit of the technology. There was a good chance this exosuit would be much better than its identical counterparts on Earth. For instance, there was no discrepancy in my own actions and those of the suit. It followed my will perfectly and was adjusted to every one of my joints like it had been custom fitted to my body. With a mere thought empowered by Psycha, I was able to manipulate the HUD and change the identifier tags for Amara and Maxwell to friendly. On a whim, I flicked the visor between its different modes, going through its night vision, thermal, and fusion visuals. All of them had augmented reality displays over them, giving improved utility. After playing around with some of the other functions, I finally brought out a new weapon. It was called the Caseless Munitions Rifle Model 21, or CMR-21. It operated by locking a bullet in front of an ignition chamber where a newly developed explosive liquid was injected in precise amounts. The result was a caseless weapon capable of firing at variable and customizable speeds ranging anywhere from semi-automatic fire to fully automatic fire at over 1,200 RPM. The liquid solution was stored in 2 canisters in the shoulder of the weapon and mixed during injection, while the bullets were stored in conventionally shaped magazines capable of holding several times more than cased bullet magazines. The only limitations for the weapon, short of access to the specialized munition resources, were heat and chamber durability. However, it was just the first example of the new technology one would have access to. From extreme-range sniper rifles to smart munitions, explosives, and brand new ways to conduct warfare, the gear presented to me in this 8th dimension was beyond even what I would have guessed before advancing. Each authority was jumping eras, and with exponential growth, this jump was significant. The exosuit would multiply my strength and, depending on how it responded to empowerment, could give me capabilities comparable to knights around the same authority. By itself, the exosuit was worth the entire advancement. Everything else was within expectations, simply a matter of applying smart technology to the finer facets of weaponry. When I left Earth, such technology was not just being theorized, but actively developed and produced. It may not have been getting mass-produced for entire militaries due to financial unwillingness, but technology solved that issue in time. This era of technology was only between 2 and 3 decades beyond the time that I had left. Every advancement before had jumped about that much time. I was thrilled to see myself getting such useful tech at this level, thrilled that I wouldn't be limited to merely what I knew. It only meant that I would be able to survive the dangerous battles I was bound to get into in the future. But it also left me with questions, the same ones I had asked myself when Quan and Song told me what year they had come to this world. If the timelines between this world and Earth weren't linear or parallel, then could I ever hope to step back into a world where my family still lived? Getting back to Earth was a pipe dream, but I figured that if there was a way here, there was a way back. But finding a way back wouldn't help if I came back to an Earth many decades in the future, a future where my family was either aged and elderly or dead. I knew anything was possible at this point, but the thought of it still spoiled my mood every time I thought about it. And unfortunately, it was impossible for me to just ignore it. I sighed and continued checking out the new gear being bestowed upon me. I forgot sometimes, but my coat wouldn't last forever, wouldn't always be able to keep up. That I was getting my hands on high-tech armor meant that in the future, I'd be able to supply myself with armor capable of operating at my level, never to become obsolete. Granted, I'd probably want to buy myself something nice anyway and give myself some more insurance. But the minimum was always nice to have. Not everything could be prepared for, but I'd always have my summons. I looked at Amara through my visor, smiling. I heard that Vetsmon flew in a week or so ago. Call everyone up. I'm itching for a good spar. That time an American was reincarnated into another world. Chapter 275, Training Data. November 4th, 627. Since when has Vetsmon been back? He's been in the Holy See for 8 or 9 days. He's just been busy, so I haven't poked around. But I need someone to test this on, and I'm sure Tana wants to see him. May as well make something out of it. Amara looked at me like she was more shocked by my words than the metal weapon clamped over my body. I knew exactly when Vetsmon flew in, my seed programs keeping tabs on him and those around him. He was one of the first people to leave what the Order called the Island of Retribution, apparently because he had been mortally wounded, half killed from the descriptions of his wounds. He got treatment from Halolite, but soon after recovery, he was sent back out. To where, I couldn't track. All I heard was that he was going to get operated on, receiving both a crown and an invocation. It had been some months since then, so he already had both and should have acclimated to them. It was only recently, though, that I finally got word of his return to the Holy See for proper leave. It was good that the Order was treating him well. If not, I would have already taken him for myself, lest they waste his talent. Amara sent some messages as I fiddled with some of the communication software within the exosuit. The suit could send data via radio, microwave, and laser. Interestingly enough, it was also capable of tapping into the aerial network. That was definitely the spirit at play. I bound it to my profile before downloading all the data I wanted. Then I sent my own messages to those I knew could get Vetsmon an expedited pass to my estate. Indeed, I was now the owner of an estate within the wedded city. I had decided to buy out some places and people near the edge of the territory and get myself situated within the prosperous and self-sufficient city-state. Of course, Maxwell couldn't be bothered to fly out, so I still had to come to the capital for this advancement. Nevertheless, it was my new home base. I also wasn't the only one officially living there. After contacting all relevant parties and arranging quick plans to meet at the estate, I sent the exosuit back to my 8th dimension and turned to Maxwell. How about you leave your hidey hole and come visit the property with us? No thanks. What? Too busy rereading the books you yourself wrote for the 100th time. No, I'm just not interested in seeing someone from the Order. I also like peace and quiet, so I'm inclined to avoid a bunch of hormonal young adults returning from war. Just take the next advancement formation and leave before Luna gets word and stops by. He placed a large orb on the table, which I grabbed and infused my psycho into. Unlike last time, it didn't sting when I tried to intake the huge chunks of information. A few glances told me that the formation was actually smaller than the last, but it was no less complex. I couldn't recognize the arrays within most of the clusters, new forms and symbols completely eluding me. Still, I had an idea of what it was going to do. I needed more psyche, but from now on, it wouldn't be a simple matter of stuffing my soul with more. I would be multiplying my reserve, but I would also need to make it far denser. The Great Barrier demanded both quantity and quality. I stashed the orb, Maxwell waving me off. You can get your own crystal for cultivating. Ah, come on. It's not like you have a use for it. Give me yours. Hell no. You're several times richer than I am now after copying my rails, so bug off and get your own. Copy. I'll admit I'm richer, but I didn't copy anything. Those trains are a technology centuries older than I am, and my engine tech is the first of its kind. Then why did I have to give you my enchantments? God forbid a man gets some inspiration. Amara's face fell flat to the side, a sigh escaping. After another few minutes, I finally retreated with her and left Maxwell to his devices. We stopped by to talk to Luna, whom I invited to the estate. Unfortunately, she told me that with the recent success over at Retribution, she and Anderson were busy preparing for the next step. While the details of that operation weren't mentioned, I knew enough. They were trying to get themselves back onto the mainland of the Pillars of Creation, a massive step in the fight against the Scourge and only possible with my technology. Of course, the Order had other plans beyond a land invasion. I wanted to find out, but the Order was getting better at keeping things beyond my purview. People were learning about the potential of the aerials and not just starting to conceive of potential threats to information security, but acting on it. We sat down with Luna and talked for some time before deciding to leave. Not long after, we were on a private plane to the wedded city. The plane landed in my backyard. Literally. I had a runway behind my estate as well as some hangars for multiple private planes and helicopters. After stepping off, my head butler was there waiting with a car. I smiled at him as Amara and I walked over. Erhun, good to see you. You as well, sir and lady. He bowed a bit, dressed in an unassuming suit. Erhun had come straight from Sector 4. Being one of my pale horsemen, the leader of a team at that, he knew all the ins and outs of subterfuge and security. If anything, he was quite overzealous. He was 55 years old, but looked no older than 30. He was an Authority 10 knight, at the end of his talent, but still extremely skilled with the blade and, most importantly, extremely loyal. He was put in charge of overseeing security for the construction of my estate. After it was finished, he proposed that he take over both maintenance and security for the grounds, eager to become my head butler. Why an Authority 10 knight would want to become a butler, I didn't know, especially when I knew how much he loathed human complacency in the fight against the Scourge. He was supposedly as extreme as I was, according to Polly, being rather outspoken and vigorous with his application of my counter-espionage policy while at Iron Legion. But his views aligned with mine, and he was eager to follow and serve, so I decided to give him the chance. Since then, I haven't had a single issue with any of the affairs around my estate. Every time I came home, it was clean, warm, and my needs were always ready to be catered to. With as much as I had been home recently, I was glad to have the little things taken care of. We stepped into the car and started driving, the ride smooth and fast thanks to recent developments in suspension technology. I asked while looking out the window, viewing the lavish and well-maintained grounds. Are the others here? Most of them are, sir. Phaidon landed with Pontek, Aki, Kata, and Jaya an hour ago. Shadowbane and Blackblood have been resting here with Tana and Arya since not long after you sent the call. Good. Keep an eye out for a church plane. Vetsmon should be arriving soon. Understood. We pulled up to the mansion, stepping out into a courtyard built into the mansion itself. Erhin followed, Another butler taking the car to the underground garage. The mansion wasn't a castle. I wasn't interested in walking a mile to the dining room or living room, so it was relatively compact despite what my money could buy. The main building had 10 rooms surrounding a large living space and outdoor social area. There was a large indoor atrium, a massive outdoor garden, and just about all the luxuries someone in this world could get. Built like a fortress and dressed as my money warranted, the 3-story mansion was about everything the earthling in me could hope for. I had my own workshop, Amara had a study, and there was plenty of space for both a family and for others to stay with us. That wasn't mentioning the building not far from the main one, a residence for the maids, butlers, cooks, and other workers that lived here. They were living nicely as well, at least half of them from Sector 4 like Erhun, acting as additional security forces besides those that were obvious. Of course, it wasn't like I was paranoid living in the wedded city. That's why I didn't force the families of those who worked here to also live on site like those in Wonderland. After entering through the back door, we went to the living area where we found everyone. It was a bit after noon, and I saw Fiden floating on his back in the heated pool with Pontek, the women sitting around either on a lounge chair or with their legs in the water. Maids were bringing them snacks and drinks, which just about all of them seemed perfectly accustomed to. Well, you guys look like you're having fun. Oh, hey. Congrats. Tana enthusiastically waved as Amara walked over to her. She had also advanced to Authority 8 in the last year, ahead of me, like everyone else. She's also the one who moved into my estate. While on paper she still held residence at her father's estate, she much preferred to be in mine, and I had no issue with it. I actually built her a nice 2-story home next to the main building. You know, for when she and Vetsmon started making super babies. Apparently her home wasn't very warm despite being welcoming, and the reason was rather obvious after I did some quick digging. Putting it simply, her father was a conniving, lecherous asshole. Being the 4th child of his 3rd wife, Tana was generally disregarded until she showed some talent at the magisterium. Even then, she apparently had some generically talented older siblings that received all of his support in the military. Even after becoming one of the magisterium's top elites, he wasn't satisfied. Anything less than the best wasn't enough, and she had still been weak back then, unlike her siblings in the military. She was nearly discarded after Purple Sky, receiving no support from her father while entering the military and having to rely on Telexia for a station with Amara. After that, she continued to receive nothing. Until, of course, I made my rise. With her new status as one of John Cooper's closest friends and a soldier of Iron Legion, her father had made no shortage of attempts to get close to me by proxy. But Tana refused to bother me with that, which I greatly appreciated, and preferred to put some distance between them. She only ever went home when absolutely necessary. She still cared greatly for her mistreated mother and blood siblings. After all, my estate, her home, was a good haven for her. Amara also enjoyed having her friend live next door. Not that we were here all the time, but such a big space for just the two of us could get a little boring, especially without the modern entertainment I was once used to. Arya also recently moved in with Tana. She didn't particularly care for living in the founder's market with the Tavares, so given the chance to move, she took it. On top of those two, Fiden also talked to me about moving in, but apparently his father was now trying to declare him the official heir, so that wasn't much of an option. Normal noble stuff. So I wasn't planning on being that concerned unless Fiden needed my help, such as with finding a wife. No man with such smoldering good looks could go without a woman when he was going to inherit an estate. The rooms there were meant to be filled. As for Shadowbane, well, this was the wedded city. She and Blackblood enjoyed hanging out here when they weren't on the front lines getting pelted with charred monster blood. Everyone stood to congratulate me. I shook a few hands and gave a few hugs. Then, Aki asked, "So, what new summons have you unlocked? Has the tech level advanced?" "Yes, it has." "Hey, Fiden, care for a spar?" "Let's do it." Fiden smiled, obviously eager for a battle. With a step, everyone headed to the training grounds, yet another building on the estate that branched off the main one. We arrived, the place clean and the air fresh. The floor was solid metal, as were the walls and ceiling. There were all kinds of devices for things like weight training and advanced target practice. I also had a range outside. Everyone stood to the side as Fiden and I moved to the center of the metal sparring ground. Once there, I took off my coat and put it in my spatial storage. "What kind of combat?" "Melee. Hands and weapons. I won't use guns." With or without armor? I smiled at his question, calling my summon. Aki's eyes bulged when John lifted his foot. A metal suit appeared around him, his foot getting locked into an assembly of servos and armor. After his other foot was in place, it looked as if the armor swallowed him. Metal skeletons locked around his torso and limbs like chains, plates of armor sliding over and clamping down in precisely machined places. Camouflage covered him, fabric rigs holding grenades and ammunition carriers covering his chest. A large knife sheath manifested on his shoulder, looking more like a short sword with its length. Then his face disappeared into his helmet, the visor crawling with some kind of optical technology. It only took a couple of seconds for everything to fall into place, and by the time it finished, John was standing at just about 7 feet tall. The bulk of the armor made him look like a metal monster, a tank in the form of a person. Phaidon looked up at him, frowning. Since when does a fucking Authority 8 summoner look like that? He sighed and put on his own armor, his previous question answered. Once his training spear was out, metal but dulled around the edge, John's voice echoed from the suit with the peculiar processing of a speaker, sounding a bit more menacing than usual. Ready to dance, pretty boy? Can you in that massive suit? That's what you're going to help me find out. John squatted a bit, his fingers fluttering alongside their metal counterparts. Aki glanced around as the two stood there, staring each other down. It looked like Phaidon was hesitating to decide what to do. She skipped over to Amara, who was staring at John with a wide smile. Hey, so, looks amazing, doesn't it? I can see where he got the inspiration for our own armor. Yes, but those suits were only prototypical theories when I left Earth. I just can't believe they actually made it. Even more, I can't believe he got access to future tech. I'm just wondering how fast it is. We'll see if he can keep up with Phaidon. Well, if it's built like everything else the war machine produces. Aki's mutter faded, Amara glancing at her before looking back at John. The war machine, or as Amara had heard John call it, the military-industrial complex. In a world dedicated to producing the most advanced weapons technology conceivable, what level would a suit, designed to turn a person into a walking weapon, perform at? Not to mention when it was backed by the empowerment of Psycha. Amara's thoughts stopped there when Phaidon finally launched his attack. His speed was incredible, looking like he simply teleported to John's position. He landed in his blind spot and maintained a perfect distance to attack with his spear and retreat if necessary. His aim was true, the spear heading for John's neck with space folding behind it and warping its speed like his movement did. That's when Amara heard the scream of metal on metal, eyes widening when she saw John grabbing Phaidon's spear. Locked in the grip of his fist, the spear had slid just far enough to stop in front of his visor. Phaidon's eyes bulged like he refused to believe what he was seeing. You're too predictable, pretty boy. Can't keep up with your own speed. With a yank, John ripped Phaidon's spear from his hands and sent out a fist. Amara could barely follow its speed, the metal arm slamming so hard into Phaidon's chest that there was a shockwave produced by the collision of the empowered fist and Phaidon's vigor. The exosuit won, sending Phaidon flying across the training ground. He flipped in midair, using his legs to plant against the wall to absorb his momentum. When he landed on the floor, though, he suddenly ducked. His spear came flying like a bullet, nearly going through his helmet and planting itself into the wall next to his head. John rose from his throwing stance, laughing like a madman. Then he suddenly pumped his arm, a long blade being ejected out of his forearm. Phaidon saw that and nearly slumped in premature defeat. Come on, pretty boy. Let me see your war face. Aya. John charged Phaidon, the mechanical boots of the exosuit screeching across the metal ground and his bounds closing the distance in just a few steps. Phaidon scurried around, refusing to get anywhere close to that blade. He took out a proper spear soon after creating some distance, his face dead serious as if John were really trying to kill him. The two entered another brief standoff before Phaidon suddenly zipped across space. John launched his elbow out in turn, Phaidon's body making contact with it, as if he intentionally ran into it. Phaidon's body went flying again, but he recovered quickly and flew right back in. He circled around John, using space to his advantage, but from the onlooker's perspective, it seemed like he wasn't even trying to evade John's blows. John inside his exosuit wasn't necessarily lightning fast. While he was significantly faster than he was before, it was his uncanny ability to anticipate that completely denied Phaidon's attempts to land a blow. Amara's eyes dilated as she watched. She could feel the sheer density of John's aura in the area. His predictive abilities had always been near clairvoyant, but that was just recently exaggerated by his boost in mental cognition. John had seen Fighten in battle many times. He knew his behaviors, his patterns, his quirks. While Amara couldn't begin to imagine just how John used that to his advantage, she could see the results clear as day. It was like John was reading Fighten's mind, like he had lived this day several times before, already knowing what moves Fighten would make before he even thought of them. And he hadn't even used his illusory abilities yet, let alone his new guns. If John went all out, even going so far as to bring out the seer knife and whatever other dastardly gadgets he cooked up with psychic crystals, she wasn't sure who in this room could stop him without being mentally and physically maimed beyond recognition. All because of a single advancement, because of a single suit hailing from a world of sheer technological superiority. Without it, John was still vulnerable, even with his coat. But now, that exosuit was threatening to eliminate his one weakness. Fighten's sudden shout summed up her thoughts rather well. Fuck. What kind of summoner shit is this? Cold summoners are supposed to be the weakest. Shut up and give me some more sugar, pretty boy. Daddy's still got plenty of energy. Fuck no. Amara, get your fiancée off of me. Don't bring her into this affair. This is not an affair. Amara rolled her eyes as Fighten started running, barely avoiding John's mechanical claws. They played cat and mouse for a few minutes longer, Fighten eventually drawing Blackblood and Pontek into the fray. It was only after the three started working together that John actually got pushed back, but the blows he took only highlighted the toughness of the exosuit, weapons often streaking right over its armor. Then, Amara suddenly turned, the door to the building opening. A massive figure walked in, everyone coming to a halt and turning to him. The head butler Erhin waved in the man before tactfully leaving. Vetsman stood there, an awkward, nervous smile on his face. He looked significantly different than the last time they had seen him. He stood around 7 feet tall as John was in his exosuit, and his face showed the weathering of decades instead of just years. Just his aura was unrecognizable, even compared to how it had been at the treehouse. He still radiated lingering bloodlust from his time on Retribution, the mountains of death he had carved still present in his psyche, as it was for everyone else there. His skin was still dark and tanned, his hair a month overdue for a cut. His muscles bulged from under his clothes, his forearms as thick as most people's thighs and as vascular as a bodybuilder's. He looked like the incarnation of strength itself. On top of that, his body was riddled with new invocations. That meant he had gotten his crown, and there was no doubt about its power. At minimum, it used Authority 11 materials, likely sourced from a king blood, which meant it was at least on par with Amara's, who received the best of all attainable crown materials for a warlock. Not even John was sure of the specifics, but it was safe to bet on him being the strongest in the room. Amara turned when she heard John's footsteps. He walked straight up to Vetsman and stopped, the two men staring at each other. Vetsman raised his hand for a shake. I wanted to start with an apology. John stood there silently for a few seconds before grabbing his hand. Then he suddenly twisted, pulling with such power that Vetsman was raised off the floor and flung across the air like a doll. He slammed into the opposite wall across the building, shaking the ceiling. John stepped forward, his suit groaning with power as the blade on his other forearm ejected. Your apology will be composed of training data. It's time to pit the machine against flesh. That time an American was reincarnated into another world. Chapter 276, All Mine. Vetsman rose from the floor, watching John walk toward him, boots clanking across the metal ground. He wasn't sure what the hell John was wearing, but he could guess that it enhanced his strength massively. Unfortunately, it didn't feel like much to Vetsman. Of course, it was no issue that it wasn't strong. On the contrary, the fact that such strength came from a summoner was mind-boggling. Vetsman had fought with knights who exhibited less strength. Based on the fact that John's forearm blades didn't retract, it seemed like he intended to use them. He made a decision and put his own armor on. He wasn't interested in getting poked full of holes. When John finally got in range, Vetsman threw out a punch, his stance low so he didn't get thrown again. Despite his punch snapping through the air, John smacked it away and returned a fist. His blade attempted to spear through Vetsman's armor, but the plates deflected it with some assisted movement. Then John's other fist swung around in a hook, the blade retracting so his metal fist could collide with Vetsman's raised arm. Vetsmon felt the impact on his skin despite the armor dampening it massively. After blocking, he tried to throw in some blows of his own, only to get dodged repeatedly. John was reading all his movements. Vetsmon knew about John's predictive abilities. He had spoken with many summoners, some of them having similar auric abilities that tied in with their intelligence. While all people could use aura to predict a person's actions based on the way their thoughts leaked into their aura, summoners were particularly suited to using such techniques. But the Order taught him more than just how to fight and survive. Among those teachings were ways to manipulate his own mind so that he couldn't be predicted, so that his own thoughts couldn't be used against him. It worked, to some extent. There had never been a summoner like John before, so Vetsmon couldn't be sure how well it actually performed. From the way he was getting read at every turn, it didn't seem to be doing that well. On the other hand, John's mind operated at such a high level that perhaps even predicting movements didn't matter. He could just react that fast. Vetsmon continued to block and press forward, no longer in a lower stance, his armor's weight alone able to prevent John from sending him flying. Over a short time, he started finding the limits of that suit's strength, moving to press his advantages. He swung his arm wide, his muscles nearly tearing with the strain he put on them. He managed to hook his finger on John's suit, taking that grip and clenching his fist. Next thing he knew, John swung his elbow and slammed it right into his temple. His helmet took on most of the blow, and yet it still nearly blinded him. But he maintained his composure, continuing to grab hold of the suit and pull him close. John delivered several more blows before shifting his body, swinging around Vetsmon's grip and locking his arm with his body. Vetsmon tilted and his arm strained under the lock, but his grip remained, and he didn't allow John to snap his elbow. Instead, he lifted John's body and slammed him down on the metal ground. John didn't let go until he repeated the slam for the 5th time, releasing the lock and kicking off his body. Part of John's suit tore away. Vetsmon's fingers still closed around some cloth and metal plating. Once John got away, Vetsmon turned to him and charged. He threw out a punch, and this time, John didn't avoid it. He blocked, Vetsmon battering his armor with all his strength. John had to shift with the blows, dents appearing in the suit and the machinery behind it groaning with stress. Vetsmon recoiled when John snuck in his own heavy blows. But short of being stabbed through the heart, nothing could faze him. For a time, they went blow for blow. Vetsmon started hearing cracks in John's suit as his blows got more extreme. Although marks and small dents appeared on Vetsmon's own armor, it was constructed so robustly that they were hardly blemishes. Even after being repaired, the rest of its scars far outshone what John was doing to it now. Vetsmon had trained and killed himself in the pursuit of becoming unbeatable. He was meant to be undying. His stamina never ended. Minute after minute passed. For nearly an hour, Vetsmon beat John's suit into scrap. Sometimes he would grab him and tear away plates of armor, exposing a metal skeleton and making him wonder what kind of technology could build such a thing. Other times, he would be forced to defend. When John launched a flurry of unceasing attacks, chained together with perfect timing and completely shutting down all of Vetsmon's actions, his predictive skills and sheer strength were showcased. They only got stronger and faster as John used the suit more. Vetsmon could tell that he was still learning, and yet the incredible violence backing John's actions forced him to understand that John was far from limited to expertise as a ranged fighter. He suddenly remembered that he hadn't asked when John last advanced. He could sense power far greater than any other summoner at Authority 8 he'd known. John was comparable to Authority 10 summoners, some of the greatest summoners in the Order. The sheer amount of Psyche he wielded, too, was amazing. Even through the armor, Vetsmon could feel his blows, backed by Psyche and bursting with mechanical force. The amount of strength on display was extraordinary, and yet he'd throw out those blows one after the other with explosive moves Vetsmon had only seen from other knights like himself. The only downside was John's armor itself. It had its vulnerabilities, which Vetsmon didn't hesitate to exploit. If John wanted training data, he'd get some. He knew John would learn from this, so he broke him down in every way possible. He'd take the blows and then deliver them with impunity. It was only when half of John's suit was torn away and destroyed that he suddenly stopped. John's fist crashed against his abdomen, and yet there was only the weak sound of metal hitting metal. Although John was still bristling with Psyche, it looked like his armor couldn't take it anymore, couldn't deliver any more strength. John just let up, sighing with heaving breaths. His helmet was dented and its visor cracked, but relatively intact when he finally took it off. He saw John's face, far more aged than it had been back then. It lacked the same whimsy that Vetsman had known John for, the same recklessness and carelessness he lived with at the magisterium. Life had hit them both hard. His face was also covered in blood, his mouth and nose dripping with it. Suddenly, Vetsman remembered that behind that armor, there was still just a summoner there. Vetsman sent away his own helmet. The most he had were bruises and muscle strains across his body. He could have fought like that for another day, but combat with an Authority 8 summoner felt less than honorable, especially against his friend. That's when John lifted his arm, putting it around his shoulder with a heavy hand. "It's good to see you, man. You hit a lot harder than before." Vetsman was silent for a few seconds before smiling. "My training at the Order wasn't wasted." "Yeah, I fucking felt it." Vetsman walked with John as he pulled him to the side. Amara and Tana moved to meet them in the middle. Amara sighed, scanning John up and down. "So is this how men greet each other now? Beat the hell out of each other till the other can't stand?" It's actually a male dominance ritual. I won too." "The fuck you did? Put the suit away. Let me see the damage." "'Tis merely a flesh wound." John sent the exosuit away, his clothes being revealed, blood spots all over them. Amara lifted his shirt to expose the massive purple bruises across his body, some of them bleeding with split open skin. She cast a spell, a healer's spell that could reveal internal irregularities. From it she saw 4 broken ribs and plenty of blunt force trauma to organs. "Christ, John, you picked a great day to get hurt. Alinka, can you help me heal him up?" "Sure. Let's go to the house." "Tana, why don't you give Vetsman a tour of the place?" Amara turned and smiled at them as fighting came and helped John walk. Vetsman smiled sheepishly. He didn't think he had beaten John so hard. He didn't react to most of his blows, so Vetsman assumed the suit was putting in more work than that. The last time he hurt John, he had been severely punished and sent to the Order's camp, and that was for a broken collarbone, not half as bad as this. John groaned while everyone walked out of the training room, entering the main building. "I need a drink after that shit." "Vetsman, go ahead and check out the house by the main building. Get your stuff moved in. Tana can bring you to the bar once you're done looking around." "All right." Vetsman glanced to the side at Tana, who had linked arms with Arya. When she let go, though, she suddenly vanished from his senses. His brows raised, startled when he felt a hand on his arm. Tana reappeared, looking up at him and slipping her arm into his. Vetsman couldn't help his smile, the two splitting off from the rest of the group and walking outside the main building. They arrived at the house, Tana's house. "This is the place John built me. It's very nice. Sturdy too, based on the enchantments. Just as sturdy as the main building." He said the walls could absorb a tank shell. "I see. By the way, I had a question." "Yes." He looked down at Tana, feeling those achingly familiar butterflies when she looked back up into his eyes. "When did John reach Authority 8? "Today." "You mean?" "He advanced this morning. That's why he made the calls to get you here." Vetsman paused, his steps coming to a screeching halt. "I feel like an idiot now." "Well, it's not like John isn't insanely violent. But I used my full strength on a recently advanced Authority 8 summoner, and not only am I about to advance to Authority 9, but I just received a crown and set of invocations. I'm reaching heights of strength I've never thought possible, and I just pummeled a summoner. With my armor on." "Did you use those invocations?" "No. Then I wouldn't worry about it." John held back too. "If he brought out his seer knife, killing you wouldn't have been out of the question. But it's not like you guys were going that far. I hardly care about some knife." Vetsman sighed, hearing Tana snicker. "What?" "Well, that seer knife is no mere knife, but I forget that you've been gone for such a long time. Amara told me that he made a worse one too, but he hasn't shown us or used it. It's scary to think about, but oh well. Just don't stress so much. John's been in far worse positions over the past couple years." Vetsman frowned. He still didn't care much about what weapons John had. He wouldn't have complained if he had used his guns in that battle initially. Now, he was wishing that he had, anything to make it a fairer battle than it was. If those at the Order found out about the battle, he'd never hear the end of it. He'd also probably get pummeled by his superior, who'd want to re-educate him on what a fair spar looked like. Even then, he was impressed by the strength John showed. And above all, his armor failed first, not him. Vetsman had found its weak spots, and now John knew what to watch out for in a real battle. He comforted himself with the fact that not even the Order could find out about anything that happened in John's estate. Then he felt Tana's pull, glancing at her. He almost recoiled when she reached up and pulled down his neck, locking their lips together. When they separated, he just stared at her smile. "Stop with the frowning and focus on me for a bit. It's bad enough you don't join us at Iron Legion, but then you disappear to an island for a year where I can't visit. Do you know how frustrating it is seeing those two get engaged and being all lovey-dovey day after day while I have to sit here and train my ass off? Also, I'm not paranoid about falling too far behind you. And what have I gotten for it thus far?" Vetsmon remained speechless, Tana pulling him in for another long kiss. Losing himself, he wrapped his arms around her, letting her jump up and wrap her legs around his waist. They remained there for over a minute, Tana finally pulling away with a wide smile. "Yeah, you're gonna be all mine, big boy. Amara's not gonna be the only one screaming at night anymore." That time an American was reincarnated into another world by SP Forda. Chapter 277, Gray Area. Be gentle. How gentle do you think I can be while resetting a bone? Beats me. But if you're poking my lung with it, then I'd say there's a problem. Don't get smart with me. You did this to yourself. You're just lucky your body is still saturated with vigor after the advancement. Silver lining. I cringed while Amara made the final shift, my ribs falling into place with a few of their fragments. She'd been learning healing magic for a long while now. Unfortunately, she didn't often get the chance to use it. Healers were highly trained and educated, for good reason. But that training was often done in a stronghold where there were many patients and other skilled healers who could monitor. Unlike other strongholds, though, Iron Legion wasn't known for its high casualty rates. In fact, in the opening phases of Euclid's Anvil, the medical wards saw more injuries from simple operator mistakes than scourge-inflicted wounds. Most of those were classified as workplace accidents because they didn't happen on a battlefield. Thus, the number of patients a healer would see in a given day was so low that managing officers started getting in trouble because the medical wards were being turned into recreational areas out of sheer boredom. So Amara never got many chances to train her skills extensively. Part of becoming better at magic was using it, and without many patients to treat, those skills were falling by the wayside. Unfortunately, it also meant that I was doomed to be her exclusive patient. Ilinka was there taking care of the bruises, but Amara was quick to have fun resetting my broken ribs. Thankfully, I was numbed, otherwise neither of us would be having a very good time. Once done, the bone was fused and my lingering wounds were washed away with magic. Although my body would have to recover by itself for another day, I was at least brought up to fighting condition. I took another sip out of my glass of wine, smacking my lips with a smile. To my side, Ilinka burned away the used medical supplies and bloodied rags. My DNA couldn't risk being thrown in a trash can, after all. Who knows who might try to get a hold of it and grow a clone of me. Good stuff. I should start a winery. You've got enough to do as it is. Indeed. Like getting married. Amara froze, Ilinka glancing between us before finding a reason to leave. We were silent for a bit as I lay back on the reclined chair, Amara packing away the rest of the medical supplies. I asked, "Is the fact that we haven't set a date a concern for you?" "Not necessarily. Engagements can last many years, if not a decade or two. In noble circles, if a betrothed couple isn't married before they get sent to the military, they're usually engaged. They wouldn't marry until they both return stronger. So no, I'm not particularly impatient to get married. Well, where I come from, a marriage would usually happen within a year or two of getting engaged, 3 at the longest. Any more than that, and people start to ask questions. I just wanted to make sure you were comfortable, because unfortunately, I wasn't planning on holding the ceremony anytime soon." "Can I ask why?" Amara stood there, gazing at me with mild concern. I waved her over, grabbing her hand when she was close and pulling her in so she could lie in the chair with me. "Hey, you're not completely healed yet. I'm also a big boy. Be quiet and give me some skin." She resigned herself and cuddled, the two of us getting comfortable by ourselves in the room. My words from then on entered her mind alone. The kingdom is on loose sand. It's been a long time coming, but I've been seeing things recently, and I've got a distinct feeling that the next few years are going to be rough for us politically. Seeing what? Rebellion? No, worse. I brought up my aerial and projected some images of people. Well, not people anymore. They were human with new features. The distinct cosmetic changes came in the form of bright colored eyes and horns on the head, usually coming from the forehead, sometimes coming from the back. The few pictures I showed were of these humanoids in wide society, pictures that my pale horseman had acquired personally. Some were seen walking through the capital, others were from large towns and other cities. There were some pictures of entire groups numbering in the dozen or hundred. Amara's eyes narrowed. Royals? No. They're a new breed of human, or at least that's what they're calling themselves. Nobody knows where they came from yet, but they've been appearing in large numbers throughout the kingdom. Sector 4 reports also state that there are entire villages of these humanoids, and not new villages. All of these people are documented citizens of the kingdom and have been for their entire lives. But they underwent changes, turning into this. Corruption. Yes, but of a new kind. And these corrupted are attempting to pass themselves off as human. Unfortunately, it's working, and it's going to lead to a massive problem. As more and more people offer themselves, an entire portion of society is going to turn into pawns for the scourge to manipulate. I brought up a new batch of pictures, this time being images of famous nobles with the new corrupted features. Even high society will succumb. Then you're going to have a massive chunk of humanity's political and strategic power in the hands of the scourge, all without a single fight. How are they doing this? There's no way people can't see the obvious issue. Even then, such corruption can only be carried out by scourge. Have they hidden themselves? Nope. My theory is that they managed to refine their methods of corruption to such a level that it's either no longer so mutating or just not nearly as intrusive. They can corrupt people without reducing their sense of self and intelligence, at least not too much. In fact, Sector 4 has found a clinic for this corruption in the capital. It's not public, but it's gaining popularity. But people wouldn't go through something like that unless they got something extremely valuable. Let me guess, it gives them magical power. Ding ding ding. My witch is so smart. I smothered her in some kisses and put down my aerial, wetting her neck and hearing complaints of ticklishness before stopping. This is a serious conversation. Then stop elbowing me. Stop tickling me. Anyway, I pulled up some other reports and metrics on my aerial, Amara grunting. I'm willing to bet that these corrupted will manage to infect kingdom society. But that doesn't happen unless noble society allows it, which means they are, by extension, corrupted themselves. This eventually leads to the scourge controlling the kingdom and manipulating its resources, both human and material. Naturally, military installations like Iron Legion will have no place in such a society, and I would never bend to such corruption. This leaves us at a personal crossroads, which is, if we get married and I do something stupid, your family could be implicated. But if you want your family to have an out, a way to dissociate from me, or us, then I think it would be wise to either refrain for now or get married in secret. Okay, but when you say do something stupid, you mean? I mean treasonous. Something that the kingdom will use to reduce my power. Iron Legion is this world's only private military power, and it's managing to compete with the kingdom as a whole. Not to mention how San Industries is rapidly becoming an economic power that controls the world's technological level. If I started expanding, maybe multiplied my number of troops, there's no reason I couldn't build an army that could decimate the kingdom. They know that. They just didn't think I would initially succeed, and now they're threatened. Given some years, they're going to do something about me, and it's not going to be pretty for anyone involved. Amara was silent for a bit, eventually nodding. All right, but wouldn't you want to cooperate with my mother? And the Raven Chief? I thought they were brewing rebellion themselves. The only reason their initiative can even be called a rebellion is because of their own personal and economic power. Without me and what I've done for their soldiers, they would sit on their hands for another decade. By that time, the scourge would be crossing the river of desolation, and the kingdom would be getting fucked anyway. This is to say that they still need time, need an opportunity, and unfortunately, they wouldn't be enough to back me if I did decide to do something. They need time, and I'm going to have to burn some bridges long before they're ready. One of those bridges is going to have to be my family then. Probably. They're going to be a hidden card, but to become that, we have to be out of the picture. Getting married might make that slightly more difficult, but that's also why I'm inclined to simply get married in secret. As much as I want to rub it in everyone's faces, being subtle is probably the smarter move. Probably. If that's the case, I'll follow your plans. But at the same time, I'm wondering if there's anything we can do. For instance, taking out those behind the corruptions. If we can stop it before it gains enough traction, maybe it could prevent a massive civil war. I smiled a bit, enjoying listening to her talk about getting our hands dirty. That certainly sounds fun, but unfortunately, it's already too late. I've already picked up on chatter regarding some of the royal children, the princes and princesses of the kingdom. 4 of them are in on this, and they also happen to be the 4 who wield the most political power. 3 of those are in bed with the sovereign families, the Grand Dukes, 2 of which are directly tied to the clinic itself. You have to realize that these issues don't begin with the citizens. They begin with the elites. They are the reason these corrupted are propagating. So killing a few minions here and there will hardly do anything. They can and will be replaced. Well, no reason we can't kill marquises and counts. They're within our combat ability. And they can also be replaced. They are a minion like many others like them. My concerns lie with the source of the problem, the scourge itself. Primarily, the being who suddenly came up with this method of corruption. I pulled up another picture. On it the profile of a corrupted. It was a man in his 30s, nothing outstanding about him. However, there was a mark on his neck. It was small, and with the resolution of the image taken from the distance the mark was barely noticeable. But my brain instantly resolved the mark to be that of 3 numbers. I zoomed in on the image for Amara, tracing the numbers. That right there is what's known as the mark of the beast. I can assume it's on every single one of these corrupted, but those numbers are a problem. Why? Because the mark of the beast is a concept from Earth. I've never heard of it here, not in the church's public scriptures anyway, but those numbers are unmistakable. That means that there is a person from Earth who has worked with the scourge to develop this corruption method. Not only that, they gave them a rather obvious name. I pulled up a long document of text, highlighting one word. They're calling these new corrupted Nephilim, beings of earthen Christian legend. I'm absolutely certain that there's an earthling working with the scourge, applying their knowledge to the scourge's genetic mutation techniques. You're telling me that someone with your freakish talent is helping the scourge. Nobody ever said that we earthlings couldn't be evil. I'm also not going to bother guessing what powers are responsible for bringing us to this world. But I have my guesses about who would know about all this. I brought up some more reports, these coming from my pale horsemen in church territory. There have been raids conducted by the Order on clinics, such as the one in the capital. To them it's obvious that these Nephilim are corrupted, but it's clear to me that even they are having a hard time simply wiping them out. Their remnant humanity is introducing this world's first gray area, and the church isn't sure how to handle it without being accused openly of mass murder. So the Nephilim are spreading even in their territories, just at a reduced rate as they battle it out with propaganda. But they're doing something about it, at least. And you think they know about the evil earthlings? I think they do. And now we've got a person here to confirm my theory. Vetsmon. Yes, but I'm going to let him have his fun first. Interrupting them now would be awkward. Well, I'm sure both of them are penned up. Tana has complained to me no small amount of times. I chuckled a bit, forcing down the urge to tap into the estate's enchantments. There was nothing that went on here without my knowledge, and I had seen Tana's bedroom soundproofing activate a while ago. I messaged Urhan and told him to send a chef to their place. They'd be hungry once they were done. After that, I grabbed and squeezed Amara's thigh, my nose in her neck and feeling the goosebumps on her skin. So, when should we get married? I'm quite eager. Well, it's not like I know your schedule. Babe, you give me a day and I'll move heaven and earth to make it happen. If you want it on New Year's in the Holy See, I'll call the Pope and tell him to fuck off with his fireworks so we can have a peaceful night. If you want it in the royal palace, then I'll talk to the king myself and get us the throne room. I thought you wanted to be subtle. Au contraire. My wife's preferences far supersede political tactics. Give me when and where, whatever you want. The world is yours. I planted more kisses on her neck, these ones softer. I felt her melt into me as I slid my hand across her clothes, her breathing quickening. I really want to marry you. You should hurry and decide. Just let me think about it a bit later. Don't take too long. Wouldn't want me to get any more reckless than I have been lately. Why don't you just hurry up and grow the balls? Careful, woman. Those are fighting words. I sealed her mouth, swapping tongue before suddenly pulling away. I stood from the chair with her in my arms, then slung her over my shoulder before walking out of the room. Let's go cool off. What? Where are you? I walked through a couple hallways before ending up outside. everyone around either the bar or the poolside. Amara started flailing. "Don't you dare. Watch the splash zone." "John Cooper, I swear, dash." She was interrupted when I vaulted over the pool, her hands spreading and creating a large water spell. My hand appeared right in front of the formation, my seer knife manifesting in my grip and activating with a quick command. The long purple blade ejected and stabbed straight through the formation. With a slice, it collapsed on itself, the water below us no longer shifting until we plunged into its heated depths. I naturally didn't have a cold pool. Not like I was interested in taking a cold plunge either. We surfaced, Amara heaving for breath, her hair covering her face. "You son of a dash. Love you too, babe." Night came and Vetsman and Tana were still hiding away in their house. I didn't mind, but Arya was too nervous to enter, so she took a room in the main building like the others. After eating dinner and retiring, I tumbled under the sheets with Amara for a bit. Enough to make up for the cockblock earlier in the day plus a little extra, so Vetsman and Tana couldn't outdo us too much. In the end, I wound up in my workshop, a doorway to which was in the bedroom. I stared at the table in front of me, seeing my new generation of seer knife. It was roughly the same size, but after attaining the neural gem from that death shrine at the bottom of the Citadel's research facility, its power couldn't be compared. I had spent plenty of time over the last year or so refining everything about my Magitech. Most of it remained secret. Some of it found its way into the hands of my Wonderland teams. The piece in front of me would never be seen by anyone but my fiancée. The SER knife was evolving. The potential was limitless, especially when I started applying what was being learned from the island of continuance and the heart of transmutation at its center. Those researchers were already pulling data and developing concepts never before conceived. I would be able to utilize those principles of transmutation even without a penultimate technique that could generate all three energies. In fact, one could say I was ahead of those researchers without so much as a full day with the heart. After all, the techniques to create that protective shield around the heart were owned solely by yours truly. It was a technique developed only after the mantle had studied the heart for years. They had done all the work for me, and not only did I hold the raw data they left behind, but I was able to reverse engineer the shield itself, understand it not as a researcher, but as a summoner, codifying mana and vigor with Psycha. It was like they had given them magic intelligence. It was a way of encoding magic unlike even enchanting, or perhaps at such a high level that the two looked nothing alike despite being in the same category. Currently, it was my greatest boon from that island. While the secret to the automatons was still hidden behind incomprehensible depths of complexity, this technique alone was more than enough to make that trip worthwhile. Staring at the knife, I heard the door open behind me. Amara walked in, wrapped in a blanket and with droopy eyes. "You're really in the mood for workshopping after all that?" "My best work is done after sex. Post-nut clarity is motivating like that. Not sure what that's supposed to be, but you should come to bed. You had an exciting day today." I looked down and kissed her forehead when she came to my side. "I won't be too long. Go keep warm." A quick kiss and she walked back off, my gaze turning back to the table. A long breath escaped as I initiated another cycle. I saw my newest prototype flash, a rough outline of a blade growing from the device. This time it was composed of vigor and given form by Psycha. I had done the same with mana over the last month. Doing it with both at the same time was significantly more difficult to control, but I'd already had some successes. However, I had another application in mind for this. With this new ability to encode other kinds of magic, to some extent, I could wield the magic itself. While I couldn't outright cast spells like a warlock or empower my body like a knight, in the realm of enchanting, this could negate the need for a warlock. I wasn't sure if I could enchant by myself just yet, but I had already developed methods to tap directly into enchantments. There was no reason I couldn't also write or overwrite them. Backed by the power of the neural gem, I could create a magic weapon capable of countering every known magic there was. My SER knife, previously only deadly due to its psychic influence, would have its lethality multiplied once more. Not to mention its utility. It would be the end-all enchanting tool. I was just hoping that I could perfect it soon. The applications were endless. If I applied this Magitech to my military, then I could bolster their defensive powers massively. Tanks would be nigh indestructible to anything but the most powerful combatants. Sector 4 could start running operations in areas previously untouchable. Stealth systems would be impenetrable to anything currently developed. Weapons would become that much more efficient and more destructive. But I intended to keep this for myself, for now. I couldn't give up all my cards, especially not to a military that may not remain in my hands forever. With a sigh, I turned off the device, everything powering down as data was uploaded, backed up, and then wiped from all local logs. I left the workshop and closed the door, climbing into bed and wrapping myself around Amara, sapping at her warmth. I wasn't sure how eventful the coming days would be, but I knew now that my fight was taking on new forms. I had a feeling my hands would only get dirtier. Unfortunately for my enemies, the gray area they were introducing only got me excited. That time an American was reincarnated into another world. Chapter 278 Cheers to the End of the World. November 8th, 627. Vetsman walked down a hallway, finding himself in the training facility. He heard an explosion soon after opening the door, his eyes catching Fiden snap out of position and appear elsewhere. Unfortunately for him, there was still the sound of John's bullet hitting the metal of Fiden's armor. Vetsman glanced at John, seeing him holding a new weapon. It looked bulkier than his other weapons, yet more streamlined at the same time, like the technology had been perfected. He remembered that John was not of this world. The existence of Versals was a tightly guarded secret, but one that could wield the technology of their original world through their summons was unheard of. It answered as many questions about summoners as it created. John looked at him, setting down the weapon. He could see complex devices around its body, technology that he was only barely beginning to fathom due to how aerials were evolving. Vetsman spoke first. Amara said you wanted to see me? Yeah, I've got some questions to ask. What about? Vetsman moved to the side, watching Fiden take off his helmet, his face sweaty. John sat down on a bench, motioning for him to sit as well. After Vetsman sat across from him, he took out a cigar and started smoking. A few puffs later he asked, how much has the church told you about the fact that I'm from another world? Vetsman's heart pounded, nearly floored by the question, if not for the fact that he knew how smart John was. How did you find out? The order gave it away through their actions, but ultimately it remained speculation. I appreciate the confirmation, though I'm not happy that one of my greatest secrets was being handled without my knowledge. Vetsman glanced at Fiden, noticing no surprise on his face. He obviously knew about this. He decided to set aside his surprise and run with it. Well, I assume you've told the others. Fiden, Amara, and Tana know. Amara was naturally the first, but back then, circumstances compelled me to reveal it. Since then I've brought those closest to me into the loop. Except for you. The church beat me to you. Sorry about that. Nothing to apologize for. As I am now, a secret such as that can hardly affect me even if it got out. You of all people would know how unconcerned I am about secrets and security. Vetsman nodded with a chuckle. The order had taken John's guidances on counter-espionage and reshaped the way they conduct nearly everything. He had been grilled on all of it, victim to every obsessive summoner who got a hard-on while thinking about how tight of a hold they'd be able to exercise over information. His smile quickly disappeared, though, John's gaze suddenly piercing his thoughts. Unfortunately, I need to determine where you stand, though, Vetsman. You could say I'm questioning where your allegiances lie, but that's not quite a good way to put it. What do you mean? John took a large breath of smoke, releasing it all in a smooth stream. You and Fiden are my best friends, my brothers. Nothing that happened at the end of our time at the Magisterium has changed how I feel about you. I trust you too and Tana as much as I do Amara. But you and I, Vetsman, are a part of two different worlds. You've been trained and adopted by the Order, the Church's strongest and most covert force. They've instilled in you blind obedience, because you trust that they will lead you in the right direction. This is on top of your religious affiliations and your mutual moral fight against the Scourge. Now, the Church and I align on almost all issues. There's a reason I gave them technology that's now enabling their push toward the pillars of creation. Technology you're using to hunt down others like me, aliens who fight for the Scourge instead of humanity. Vetsman's heart rose into his throat, his body fighting every urge to react. He wasn't sure how John knew about one of the Order's most secret operations, but it was clear that he had eyes in places the Order did its best to veil. It made him wonder just how much John truly knew. But I've got secrets of my own. I'm doing things not even the Order can guess at. Things that will secure the demise of the Scourge. I think we'll always align on that goal. But that doesn't mean I can trust the entirety of the church. There are certain things I want you to know, certain things I want your help with, if not now, then in the future. I want an ally that I can trust to keep a secret, someone smart enough to keep their mouth closed when it counts. But my trust demands that yours and me is higher than that of the church. You're not asking me to place you above God, right? Do I look like the fucking Antichrist? John gave him a dumb look, Vetsman's face falling flat. He sighed and leaned forward. Vetsman, if the day comes that a head from a paladin peerage, or someone like Anderson, comes and attempts to accuse me of being heretical or tries to take something that I've built for a greater good, whose side will you be on? Vetsman went silent, pondering what such a question meant. It was difficult to believe that the church, a nation founded upon Christ, was capable of being led by people who would attempt to subvert someone like John for their own personal gain. Vetsman had seen what John had done, what he had built, the devastating blow his Iron Legion had already dealt to the Scourge. His deeds would go down in history merely as they were now, let alone the impact he would have in the coming years. And that wasn't mentioning the fact that he gave his technology in its entirety to the church, effectively free of charge, purely out of the desire to see humanity succeed against their existential enemy. His subjective flaws be damned. John deserved the highest honors the rest of humanity could give him just for what he's done thus far. For the first time in history, the Scourge's eradication could be fathomed. It was difficult to believe that anybody could possibly try to take advantage of him, strong-arm him into giving up more than he has. Vetsman expected the kingdom to do so, but not the church. And yet, he was incapable of denying that it was possible. The raging rationalization in the back of his psyche kicked his ignorance aside and pushed doubt to the forefront. It forced him to believe that not only could it happen, but it would. Anarchy permeated his brain and forced his thoughts in directions he didn't normally think possible. Thoughts about how even the church could be short-sighted, how even the leaders he revered all his life could be stubborn or so arrogant to believe that they could wield John's own inventions better than he could. It left a miasmic taste in his mouth, but he didn't fight it. He had already rationalized anarchy. Now it was just doing its job, following the rules and ideologies that he himself had rationalized it with. He glanced at John. He had his own faults. He had his own arrogance, his own stubbornness and recklessness. Anybody could find fault with him. He had his own vices and biases and prejudices, some of which probably didn't align with Vetsman's own. Vetsman had already heard a few stories from Tana over the last few days. Stories about what they were forced to do during their retreat from the treehouse. Stories about what John had done. They were secrets that couldn't ever be uttered, but being so pivotal in Tana's life, she had confided in him anyway. He had known that the things John had done, even before they had met, had drenched his hands in blood. He was far from perfect, far from innocent, but they were friends, and if there were any two things Vetsman could believe in, it was that John would always have his back, and he was hellbent on eradicating the Scourge from this world, despite it not being his own world, despite him being dropped in this place with no explanation or reason and thrust into a position where he had to fight for his life. He took it upon himself to use his intellect to develop technology and try to save the world. He believed in John's convictions, so he decided that it was only right to believe in his best friend before leaders with their own interests and potential greed. Vetsman couldn't help but smile. I think you're the last person I'd ever doubt, John. If there's some idiot, from the church or not, trying to take what's yours, I'll be the first person to step forward. We may not be around each other much these days, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't like to be your most trusted. As would I. A few years apart will hardly change how I feel about my strongest shield. I know someday we'll be fighting together again, but until then both of us will only grow. You've been doing so under the order, and I've been doing so on a little island called Continuance. John pulled out a hilt, inert until it suddenly produced a blade from distilled sika and vigor. The blade looked like solid light, glowing purple with the mixture of powers that gave it form. Vetsman felt his brain tingle, his skin crawling when he felt the subtle malice within that knife. He remembered Tana's words, suddenly understanding what she meant by no mere knife. Allow me to let you in on a couple secrets, so you can let me in on some of yours. I sighed and kicked back into my chair, the setting sun glimmering off the pool before me. The others were hanging around in swimsuits, either sipping drinks within the refreshing embrace of the water or around the bar, where one of the butlers served alcohol. I glanced at the side where one of my new summons was sitting on a small table. It was an old tech radio, capable of playing any song I wanted, even ones I didn't know existed. Unfortunately, it could only play for me, for none of those around me besides Aki knew English. But I played it anyway. They didn't need to know the language to enjoy the song. That was the beauty of music. Plus, the only other alternative was to listen to theirs, which took orbs we didn't have and taste I hadn't developed. Funny enough, the radio came from my seventh dimension. It had been hidden so deep that I came across it by sheer luck while projecting on a whim. Good thing I did, because it gave me new life. My exosuit also developed the ability to play music on its systems. It felt like a void in my soul had been filled when I heard it play. Now I was all smiles, excited about every new song that came on as if I'd forgotten about them. I watched everyone chat away, smiles on everyone's faces, and the joy in the atmosphere driving away what seemed like perpetual gloom in our collective aura. There was always something to worry about. Soon we'd be back in the midst of battles none of us wanted to fight. It was easy to get lost in these highs of life. Unfortunately, I was never good at ignoring what was ahead, even while trying to preserve my good mood. After my little talk with Vetsmon, I quickly painted a picture of the situation with the church. As I figured, they knew about us otherworlders, which they called Versals, and knew about both the good and bad ones. What I hadn't guessed was that their explanation for the transmigration was that angels brought us here to fight for humanity, while demons brought others to fight for the Scourge. Vetsman's upcoming missions involved killing the evil Versals in the Pillars of Creation. As for the church's attitude toward us Versals, well, Vetsmon wouldn't know anything about that. They knew Vetsmon was deeply affiliated with me. They may not suspect just how much he trusted me, but they had no reason to take the chance. Vetsmon would do as he was told with or without information, and they kept him in the dark. But that in itself told me plenty. The church was wary. If not people like Anderson and the Pope, then everyone else lacking absolute power was worried about us. They wouldn't hinder us. They'd even support us. But they knew that we were all protected by guardian angels and had amazing talent. If we were angered, then it would risk our turning against them. They preferred to take a mild approach, not getting too close to us, but also keeping us close enough to both protect and monitor. But even that was only because the Scourge was compelling them to. They desperately needed the firepower. So despite all their power, and despite us being foreigners from another world, they set aside their reservations and welcomed us. But how far they would let us go, how much of their power they'd let us take, was still up in the air. There was no winning against political caution. I could give them all the technology in the world, and they'd still hold me at arm's reach. My question was, if I not only pulled away from them, but tried to take a slice of this world's pie with me, how would they respond? I was pretty sure they'd do everything short of killing me. I trusted the Pope, and I trusted Anderson, but I didn't trust any of the other Paladin peerages, nor did I trust the Order's leaders and the Templar military generals. Those who didn't know me personally, only knowing me through my infamy, could only be wary of me. With Vetsmon coming to my estate, the Order was likely re-evaluating his potential relationship with me. Were we merely school friends or blood brothers? They weren't sure, but I was willing to bet that Vetsmon would be kept on that hellish continent for the foreseeable future. He wouldn't return to his peerage to take it over. They wouldn't let him, because of me. An assumption, of course, but I was willing to assume the most pessimistic outcome. Now I just had to figure out what to do from now on. Discontent was brewing throughout the kingdom. Nephilim were growing in number by the day, and the longer they went without being dealt with, the harder it would get to do just that. Over time, people would begin to accept some of them. They were previously friends and family, after all. Unfortunately, there was no reversing corruption. I knew what would have to be done, but knowing the kingdom's elite was driving this, and therefore in the hands of the Scourge, I'd be slapping faces and forging enemies should I do anything in the open, which left me just one avenue: covert warfare. Espionage, sabotage, spying, and assassinations. The Nephilim couldn't be dealt with yet. But if their protectors were eliminated, they could be too. I knew it was impossible to get rid of the true source at the moment. But as Amara said, it was better than doing nothing. However, after some time to ponder, my thoughts on how to conduct myself, as well as Sector 4, started to shift. I couldn't solve the source of the problem. I wouldn't be able to in the near future, and that meant the Nephilim and Scourge would get what they wanted. They would take control of the kingdom, and people like me, who didn't bend to their new societal norms, would be driven out or eliminated. But not everyone thought as they did. Even when they took control, chances were they wouldn't be the majority. Quite the opposite. So instead of trying to stop the inevitable, I figured I'd need to go the opposite route. I needed to sow so much discord and rage in the wide populace that the kingdom was driven into two. Although I would lose the battle in the end, I was one of the few people who could see the entire war. I knew what I had to do. I knew what role I needed to play. No, I knew what role I wanted to play. I wasn't completely sure what I'd lose doing so, but I was being left little choice. Thankfully, I hardly had to prepare. The Nephilim was a wild card I hadn't expected, but my perpetual paranoia had not been for nothing. I had been ready for the king himself to suddenly find me guilty of some bogus charge and attempt to take me down, let alone a slow takeover like this. My pawns were everywhere. My eyes were all-seeing. My ears were behind every wall. With my newest technology, my enemies were effectively blind. They didn't know that the lives of all those below a duke were in my hands, to take according to my will. What are you thinking about? I heard Amara's voice, turning to her as she came to lounge next to me. I got an eyeful of her swimsuit before accepting her hand, snaking it into mine. Just about how much fun we'll be having soon. Now, when you say things like that, it makes me think we're about to encounter another cataclysmic event like Purple Sky. Tell me we're not. Well, I gazed out beyond the pool, attempting to quantify just how much blood I was going to be soaking my hands with. In a way, for everyone else, this is going to be much, much worse. I tipped my glass, clinking it against hers as she stared at me with an anxious face. Cheers, darling. To the end of the world. May the Scourge remain naive in thinking they're the ones shaping the future. That time an American was reincarnated into another world by SP Forda. Chapter 279, just right. December 31st, 627. I never asked. How was Tana's meeting with Vetsman's parents? She said it went well, besides all the issues with her walking around and tripping alarms. I smiled, smoothing out my suit coat. It had been about 2 months since Vetsman had returned. Now it was the end of the year, and he had returned to the Holy See for the holiday. Tana went with him so she could finally meet his parents in an official capacity. But Tana's new ability was still relatively uncontrollable. It was why in the estate she always stuck to Amara. And if Amara wasn't there, then she was with Arya, who she had grown close with. By making contact with others, her invisibility would be broken and she could be interacted with normally. But she had been working on getting that under control, trying to make herself visible on demand. She had made successes, but it wasn't perfect, which means church formations within peerage buildings and facilities saw her as a lurking intruder trying to sneak around when she was by herself. She could just go back to her normal state and avoid the alarms, of course. But it still made for a humorous story after she got hunted by Vetsman's father one night. I checked my aerial, Erhan having sent a message that transportation was ready whenever I was. We stayed behind to have an early holiday with those at the wedded city. The Raven Chief insisted that I be there for at least one meal since the Talarias weren't coming this year. Fiden went back to his father's estate. Aki and Kata were in the Holy See like Vetsman, and Arya had gone back to the Tavera family to hang out with the friends she made there. Everyone was somewhere else. Amara and I were going to be spending this Christmas in the city of Joffrin since Talexia wanted us there with the family. Apparently, the entire family was going to be in attendance, which neither of us were happy about. But since I refused to host anything Talexia said, I had no choice but to get off my lazy ass and show up. With my suit making me feel festive, I turned to Amara and admired her dress. As with everything she wore, she was particularly stunning. I wasn't sure if she believed that, though. We were not going to this party in conventional dress. On the contrary, I had decided to reflect my otherworldly knowledge in the form of Christmas's most joyful icon. I gave an exaggerated chortle, smiling at Amara as she adjusted the puffy white fur that cuffed her collar and skirt. The red dress made her hair glow, the vibrancy only achievable thanks to a custom design from my friend over at the Black Spider Market's most famous suit store. Is this really what people wore in your world? Seems flamboyant. Absolutely. We all followed in the footsteps of Mr. and Mrs. Claus. You could say this is a more stylized version of their dress, though. We're going to stick out. We were going to stick out anyway. We're too famous not to be the center of attention. I kissed her neck before dropping a Christmas hat on her head. Can't forget the most important piece. Well, it's better than my witch hat. That's the spirit. Next year, I'll have to put on a fat suit and white beard too. I think this is enough. I should get myself a reindeer too. And a sleigh. With some enchanting, there's no reason I can't fulfill the legend. Amara smiled and rolled her eyes, the two of us looking at our mirror's image. After some time, I pat her on the hip and turned. We should head out. Your sister was eager to see us. Sure. I'm excited to give her my present. As am I. She's going to need everything she can get. Hopefully with both, nothing will ever happen to her. Well, she's a knight. She's going to be tough. I thought about the device that I had spent nearly 3 months working on. A few months into her 3rd year of the Magisterium, Faye was at the point where she would be soon heading to various military bases for training and experience, just as we did. Now that she was 19 years old and a knight like her father, she had advanced and become a proficient warrior. But although the Magisterium had taken on drastic safety reforms after the Calamity class, the front lines were still dangerous. I had my own plans to allow Faye's Magisterium class to make visits to the Glass Desert, an offer the Magisterium couldn't possibly refuse, but she wouldn't be under my protection all the time. I had thus built her a present that would put my mind at ease, somewhat. I couldn't let my sister-in-law go without a worthy Christmas gift, after all. After making sure we had everything, Erhan arrived to drive us to the airstrip. Once there, we boarded a private jet and flew to the city of Joffrin. Hearing the propellers of the plane also reminded me that I needed to finish perfecting turbojet engine technology. It was almost there. Wonderland was already running tests on some prototypes, but it wasn't quite finished yet. It demanded my personal touch, yet it would remain a technology exclusively in my hands. I had no intention of releasing such superior mobility to potential enemies. We landed in the city of Joffrin's airfield before long, Erhan already having arranged transport alongside the butler of the Teleria estate. We were driven to the mansion, and once there we disembarked among a small crowd of other Teleria branch families. Despite the sun having already set and snow falling from the sky, the two of us stood out like a sore thumb. Amara and I linked arms and walked into the main part of the mansion, moving to the social hall where we found Telexia. She turned to us as soon as we appeared, Ikor beside her, and gave us a small smile. You always know how to be outstanding, John. I know Amara didn't imagine this dress. Just getting into the Christmas spirit. It's good to see you guys. I gave Telexia a hug, Amara hugging her father. At the same time, I felt a few dozen eyes land on us, including some corrupted gazes. Hey Telexia, do you remember what I said about the Nephilim? Yes. Unfortunately, there's little I could have done to stop what already happened. I turned my eyes as we separated from our hug, finding a few Nephilim mingling among their family members. They were young adults, perhaps around my age, and were sitting around Authority 4. The urge to take out a pistol was difficult to resist. I ask that you send them away from here. Use it as a chance to reinforce the fact that Nephilim are not welcome in your family. I know you'd want me to refrain from doing so myself. Very well. Telexia sighed and agreed, waving Ikor over as they walked over to the corrupted. I had thoroughly informed her on the nature of these Nephilim and the fact that they were not to be trusted. As it was beginning to become publicly known due to recent outcry, Nephilim were prone to criminal and impulsive acts. As it was known to me and my vast internet of intelligence, Nephilim were simply a dialed-down corrupted. They were evil at their core, seeking the destruction of humanity in their own subtle way, starting with every nefarious deed they could commit against those lesser than them. I knew that some of the Teleria family branches had already been corrupted. Noble circles as a whole were already succumbing. But I had assumed that they were smart enough not to show themselves in this place. Turns out their audacity was greater than I realized. I glanced at Amara, seeing her stare at them with disgust, mana moving through her body subconsciously. I smiled at her and linked her arm with mine. Come, dear. Let's not sour our mood. There will be plenty of time later for retribution. I know. She sighed and we walked away, off to find her sister. We wandered the estate with no particular rush, finding Ilinka before we found Faye. We joined her for a quick drink, and that's when I met her boyfriend. I had seen his name before. He was the son of a marquis in the southwestern portion of the kingdom, Marquis Tolka. The Tolka family was an exporter of coastal goods with a fleet of merchant and fisher ships. I had considered giving them a contract for hosting my theoretical navy since they knew the most about aquatic fauna in this world. Unfortunately, though, I simply had no need for it at the moment. Aircraft were simply far more convenient and effective. On top of that, there was a reason the church hadn't produced a navy for attacking the island of Retribution. Unlike the beasts and animals of the land, those of the seas had remained untouched by the forces of man. As with every ocean species, there were two paragon species of the waters that had an inestimable population and therefore power. If they couldn't be communicated with and didn't like boats, then sailing the oceans was a fool's errand. Since the church decided against it, I wouldn't bother. After speaking with them for a time, Amara and I continued our search, eventually finding Faye on one of the upper floors with her friends. I saw a few faces that didn't belong to the Teleria family, friends from her magisterium class. They were all girls, and their eyes landed on me after Faye turned her gaze when I entered. I smiled, Faye jumping from her seat. "Hi, John." "Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas, Faye." "What's with the voice?" "Why, I'm just in the Christmas spirit. Now I can't give you a candy cane, but I can give you a present." "Oh, what is it?" "Private. If you want it now, we can head to your parents' training room and bring it out. Otherwise, we'll do it later." Faye glanced to her friends before smiling at me. "Now please." "Sorry guys, I'll be back in a bit." They smiled at her as she came to my side. We then walked off through the party, finding our way to the training hall. Once there, Amara cast some isolation spells before dropping one of my newest inventions. It was called a Faraday shield and was the magical variant of what could be seen on Earth by the same name. It created a large field around us that programmed all of the ambient magic, turning it into its own isolating cage. Nothing that I could yet devise was capable of piercing through the shield without detection. It wasn't great for stealth as it could be detected with directional sensors, but it was still incapable of being tampered with by anything internal or external without detection. Although that didn't include all possible forms of auric techniques, something I was still working on perfecting. For now, I could only draw from my adaptive camouflage in that department. Amara and Faye stood around me. I motioned to Amara. "Go ahead and show her yours." Amara nodded and brought out 3 knives. Faye reached out for them, but Amara refrained from passing them off. "These are something similar to what my friend got me. They were previously a device the Raven family was quite adept at making. John's tech has since far surpassed its abilities. These knives are a last resort, additional lives if used wisely. When all other options are run through, stabbing one of these knives into an enemy will completely obliterate it. Most of the technology used in this knife is classified. For your own safety, it's not something I'll describe to you, but all you need to know is its function." Amara handed the 3 knives off, Faye looking a bit nervous taking them. They were relatively short knives, considering how large some knights like theirs. They looked entirely composed of metal with no defining features and no detectable magical signatures whatsoever. They were invisible to senses and easily hidden. Amara smiled. "My own knife of similar function was used by my best friend to save our lives during the fall of Purple Sky. But despite it killing our enemy, she still almost paid for her actions with her life. She would have died if not for John and a timely benefactor. So use them only when absolutely necessary. Each knife can only be used once, and there aren't any special things you need to do for them to activate. No matter the enemy, whether you stab carapace, bone, or flesh, it will know when to active, and it will kill any enemy up to Authority 10. You can wound an Authority 11, but if you're in such a position, you'd probably be killed before you even got within speaking distance. Right?" Faye sent the knives into her storage, Amara stepping forward and giving her a hug. Surprisingly, Faye was as tall as her sister, standing at around 6 feet, and likely to get even taller. Knights had a funny way of doing that. "I can't always be there to protect you, but I trust your judgment. We've got the same blood, so keep yourself safe. I don't give a damn how selfish you have to be. My sister is more important than any other student or soldier." "Thanks. I will." Faye tightened their hug before separating. Then she turned to me, my smile wide. "You two are so cute. Just bring out the present." "Aunt." I leaned away when Amara pinched me, waving my hand and bringing out the good stuff. A bracer appeared, metal and intricately designed to look more like jewelry than a functional piece of material. Faye took it, slipping it over her forearm before suddenly frowning. I smiled. "Sorry, blood sample. This thing will know exactly who you are and can only be used by you. Never lose it, and preferably, never take it off. You should have this with you at all times, regardless of what you're doing or where you are." "Okay, but what is it?" "It's your armor." She tilted her head, and then her eyes widened. She was hearing the prompts and control methods from the bracer. I waited for her to absorb everything before she activated the armband. The armor suddenly appeared over her body, her dress disappearing into the bracer. The armor was designed similarly to standard issue knight armor for Iron Legion. But of course, it was specially customized with cutting-edge technology, including the stuff that not even Wonderland had its hands on. She looked down at herself, head covered by a helmet with a visor. Like your sister, I won't elaborate on the technology. Only God and I know how many people would kill to get their hands on my tech. Giving this to you is dangerous in itself, but I've made my assurances. Even if someone tried to take it, or take you, you can rest assured that they wouldn't get very far. Anyway, that bear armor is capable of maintaining integrity against attacks up to Authority 9 and breaking against Authority 10 blows. It has a projectable shield that can survive Authority 8 attacks at the cost of energy, has full body strength and speed augmentation, full environmental isolation, adaptive camouflage, water dispensing systems, waste collection and disposal systems, internal cleaning, emergency medicinal support, and more. This armor is experimental, but it works enough to be fielded and reliable in its most important functions. Did you say waste collection? Faye looked at me weird, my smile widening. Indeed, this suit is designed to be lived in for extended durations. As in, should the situation be so dire, you wouldn't have to exit that suit at all for up to a month, not even for going to the bathroom. Even then, the suit can continue functioning indefinitely as long as it isn't damaged too much. The only reason you'd need to exit is for hygiene, medical, or suit maintenance. You mean I could go to the bathroom inside this? Yup. Her face scrunched, turning to Amara. She just shrugged. I've never tested it personally, but sometimes battles can be prolonged for days. In such situations, even the little things can get you killed. At least this sustains you. Hopefully you'll never be put into that position, but John doesn't believe in optimism. Indeed I don't. Faye stared at me for a few more seconds before chuckling. She looked around at herself, jumping around and moving her body, feeling the lack of restriction. It's a little weighty despite how slim it is. There's a lot of metal on it, but I managed to collect and refine enough titanium to make it with. It's lighter than other armors like it, especially for its toughness. I suggest you wear it around the house and train with it. Get used to it. I will. Thank you. The armor has guidance functions that you can see on your HUD. Follow them and learn what it can do. It also updates with important status information, so don't ignore it. But of course, the armor wouldn't be much without a knight's most important possession. I held out another item, a bracelet of black metal. She slipped it over her other arm and opened her hand. Your mother told me that you've settled on the spear. Now, don't take this as a nail in the coffin for your decision. Just keep in mind that I'm the richest man in the world and can acquire other weapons if you decide you want to swap. Said spear appeared in her hand. It had a black wooden shaft with intricate metal inlays across it, leading to the blade. I could feel Faye's palpable fondness for the weapon as she inspected it. I had the Raven Chief send me their best unenchanted spear for the Foundation, since they're the martial weapon masters. The shaft is made of ironwood, and the blade is reminiscent of what Aki called a yari. Double-edged, 3-foot-long straight blade, 6-foot-long shaft, reinforced with my own specially curated enchantments and implanted with a few nifty devices. It's a spear designed for you to grow into with flexibility adjusted for Authority 7 strength. This spear could last you until Authority 10. It has some weight to it, is rigid enough to take advantage of your strength, and the entire weapon is built to accommodate and supplement your vigor and aura in any amount possible. It doesn't get better than this right here. Faye let out a few laughs of excitement, moving to the side and performing a few swings with the spear. It cut through the air with near silent sharpness, only to be improved by her own skill. Then, when she infused her vigor into it, the blade let out a faint glow. It left a trail of power in its wake, making me smile as I thought about what my own Authority 4 power used to look like. When she stopped, I clapped. Good job. How does it feel? Perfect. Good. It has another function, an ability to make the blade almost as deadly as those knives your sister gave you. Go ahead and activate it. I think I felt something like that. Faye tampered with it for a few seconds before the blade suddenly flashed. It was covered in a solid light film, the sharp edge of the film glowing with moving energy. It was technology derived from my seer knife, not nearly as deadly, but also not demanding a neural gem. That is one of the technologies that you should be careful about exposing. Use it only in battle and when you need to supplement your attacks. That light is intangible, so it adds no material to the blade itself. However, that light inflicts just about the worst pain imaginable upon your enemies, only dampened by the power saturating their bodies. The power output is set at a level that can be sustained indefinitely, but you can tune it up at greater cost. Get a feel for it before your first battles. You shouldn't rely on it, but that goes for everything. It's a tool, so treat it as such and be mindful of who is allowed to see the ability. I will. Thanks, John. Of course. She sent both the armor and suit away, reappearing in her dress before striding over and giving me a hug. I laughed and returned it. Love you, kid. Love you too. Now go show your parents and friends your new toys. I'm sure your mother is wondering why she can't see us anywhere. Hee hee, all right. Faye put everything back on before I deactivated the Faraday shield. The three of us then walked back to the house, Faye showing off her new weapon and armor to everyone. From then on, the subsequent feast and New Year countdown passed peacefully, my thoughts drifting to what I'd need to do during the upcoming year. It was slated to be complete turmoil mixed in with a few moments of reprieve. Soon enough, the Magisterium's 3rd and 4th year classes would be coming to Iron Legion for their excursion. It would be their second excursion and would last for a month. That was an event I was looking forward to. Everything else was already promising heaps of stress. I could feel the shifts within the kingdom. It was all so obvious from my perspective. I had so much information at my disposal, so much transparency, and combined with my cognition, I had already formulated the recipe for disaster. The funny part was how fast the big players were scrambling to move. My presence threw a wrench in everyone's plans, simultaneously moving plans forward and pushing them back. Iron Legion was promising victory, and the smart players were trying to keep that from happening. The smarter ones knew that I was making moves of my own, but nobody except for those I could count on one hand had any idea as to just how thoroughly I understood the chessboard. Despite that, not even Amara had any idea about what I was going to do. My only disadvantage was manpower. Iron Legion was a military of around 50,000 soldiers. The pool of individuals I could pull from to run operations in Sector 4 were few and far between. They had to be competent, smart, and loyal, but to a degree others would find extreme. I couldn't hand my darkest and dirtiest missions to just anyone, especially in the coming years. But I couldn't expand either. I'd have to pull from the kingdom's reserves, and there was not a single noble or general willing to sell contracts to me. Not to mention the amount of spies that would end up being planted. It would be a shit show attempting to weed through them all, and my issue with quality manpower would never end up being resolved. Thankfully, that's what my tech was for. I didn't need more manpower with technology and magic. The weapons and gear I was soon to arm my Pale Horsemen with would make missions a piece of cake for just a two-man team. Assassinations would be effortless. They would be undetectable. They would be efficient. I would shatter the kingdom's facade, and I would gladly reap the consequences. I could already see how all of this would go down, and I was eager to see the fires burn. I just had to be careful. I couldn't allow anybody to catch up to me. I had to maintain my advantages proportionally. My enemies were only going to get more powerful, and at some point the gloves would fall. Powerful people didn't like being fucked with. They didn't like having their wants denied. When a sovereign came to claim resources and influence, the knee was either bent or those standing would die. I had created a new economy, a new type of influence, a new world altogether, and it was not just growing, but replacing the old. Sooner rather than later, those in power would realize that what they had was no longer valued like it once was. When that happened, they'd come for the one who took what they never had. Unfortunately for them, their enemy was a big fan of scorched earth policies. Unfortunately for their enemy, he had thrown himself into a weight class leagues above his ability to confront, and the only way he could survive was by staying one step ahead. My battles were changing in nature. The danger to my life was no longer so direct. The part one didn't enjoy was ironically the one thing that was making me so much money. Mistakes would cost more than just my life. I sighed and looked at Amara, fireworks and pretty spell fire exploding in the air above us. She noticed my gaze and returned it, the two of us simply staring at each other as snow fell around us. At some point I just sighed, gave her a kiss, and went back to overlooking the city and fireworks. She laid her head on my shoulder, and for a time, everything was just right. That time an American was reincarnated into another world by SP Forda. Chapter 280. Have fun. Count Niram, I can assure you we've armed this building with our finest security personnel and enchanted systems. Not even an insect will fly near the building without us knowing about it. Tell that to the 3 dead nobles in the neighboring territories. They're hunting us, and nothing has been done to stop it. You don't even know who is doing it. The Count nearly screamed, completely covered in his best ornate armor and waving his sword around. Agent Ulvi just sighed, his people standing at their stations silently. The recent killings had sent waves of alarm through the entire region. The previous 3 nobles were those who had become Nephilim, rapidly gaining power as they had been promised. Unfortunately, they were killed soon after. That by itself wasn't necessarily an issue. It was the fact that there was no evidence left behind that could identify the killer. Not even magical residue that might point to the type of magus that did the killing. The last noble that was killed, another Count, was found in the basement of his estate an entire 5 days after he had been killed. The corpse, which was studied, had not a single wound upon it. Agent Ulvi had been tasked with protecting this Count and was supplied a small army to do the job. His superiors wanted to use the Count as bait, but simultaneously wanted to test the limits of the killer's capabilities. They wanted to know something, anything, about who they were facing. Even though Ulvi knew his superiors had an idea about who it was. The perimeter around the estate was patrolled at all hours of the day and night by dozens of soldiers. All of them were equipped with the best magical sensors, and many of the soldiers had developed auras for a more personal touch. There was a newly built wall, barriers, and even more magic sensors surrounding the main building itself. Ulvi himself was Authority 10, but the Count didn't know that. Very few people did, as his aura allowed him to hide his level from all but the best. There were guards at every door, at every corner in every hallway, with eyes on all nooks and crannies at all times with no blind spots. Not even a maid could walk through the estate comfortably, every single person having a custom ID checked at key points without exception. The doors were reinforced, the windows were sealed shut, locks were triple enchanted with an alarm for every time the lock opened and closed. Ulvi couldn't fathom anything that could get through them all, let alone get out. They weren't even using aerials. Every single device not custom curated by themselves either destroyed or taken away from the estate. It was just about the most secure place in the kingdom, short of the royal palace or magic spire. Ulvi glanced at a window, seeing the veil of night fall outside. Lights remained on. No darkness for lurking within the building. Count, you've had your dinner. How about you retire? For all I know, as soon as I step inside my bedroom, they'll jump out and kill me. Then I will escort you personally. Ulvi started walking with Count Niram, the two leaving the living area and ascending the flight of stairs to reach the master bedroom. When they entered the hallway, things quieted down, Ulvi enjoying the lack of noise after all the Count's yelling and paranoid footsteps of every worker in the building. They reached the bedroom, Ulvi entering first. He opened the door and scanned the bedroom, seeing and feeling absolutely nothing. He even dropped a scanner, the device letting out a few pulses and coming back with no life signs whatsoever. Not even an insect. Not surprising. The window had been shattered and filled in with stone days ago when the Count had a panic attack. Of course, even with a scan and personal look, Niram wasn't satisfied. They could be hiding. Count Niram, you are an Authority 9 knight being protected in every way imaginable. Agent Ulvi looked down at him with a hint of disdain. Start working on controlling your fear. Fear is what keeps you alive. And those other Counts aren't. So obviously they weren't as astute as me. The Count started barking again, causing Ulvi to roll his eyes and sigh. Do as you wish. With those words, he turned around and left, shutting the door. The Count's whimpers went silent as soon as the door clicked shut, Ulvi letting out another sigh. He started walking back down the hallway, seeing the guards posted at the corners, occasionally glancing around. Only 3 steps away, though, Ulvi stopped, staring at both of the guards in his vision. He saw one of them turn his head toward him, yet he heard nothing. Not even the faint sound of moving leather or shifting metal of the armor. Ulvi spun around and grabbed the door of the Count's bedroom, throwing it open. His heart pounded when he saw nothing but blazing fire. The entire room was engulfed in flame, the Count lying on his bed, his head sitting on top of his large belly. Across the room, Ulvi could see a cutout in the wall, the person-sized hole cut so square that it was impossible for someone to have done it on the fly. That's when the sound suddenly came back to him. Olvi's ears getting hit with the crackling of burning wood and the whipping of the flames across every piece of fabric on the walls and floor. Then he heard a few explosions from the floors below. He ran out through the cutout in the wall and dropped to the first floor. In the courtyard, he could see a dozen dead guards and maids. None of the maids were alive, not even the ones that had yet to be turned into Nephilim. They had killed them all, without exception. Moving inside, Olvi saw more dead guards and agents. He couldn't find any that were alive, not even the most powerful of them. Most of them didn't even have their weapons drawn, their necks slashed or decapitated at their posts. And everything was on fire, glass blown out in explosions and structural beams blasted to bits. He stood there mute, unable to even react. In the time it took to walk to the Count's room, they had devastated the building. In the time it took for him to walk away 3 steps, the Count was beheaded and placed in his bed, the killer escaping without a sound. And not a single alarm had gone off. Olvi watched everything burn, nothing being picked up by his senses except the guards that were returning to the mansion from their patrols, having seen the fire. He couldn't even begin to guess at how he'd try and find the killers. In the time he had stood there, they had likely escaped and hid. He raised his hand, scratching his head where the horns came out of his temple. So much rage bubbled up inside of him that he wasn't sure how to vent. He looked at the corpse of a nearby human maid. It was a clean cut across the back of the neck at the base of the skull, severing the spine from the brain. It was a painless, instant death. The sight of it only amplified his anger. They knew he'd kill the human maids if they had left them alive. They had killed them out of mercy. They even left behind different wounds, the Nephilim maids having been decapitated. It's like they were taunting him. They were telling him that they could easily read his mind. They were calling him simple. The guards from the patrol rolled up in vehicles, jumping out and running to him. What happened? There were shouts, but Olvi couldn't hear any of it. He turned to the guards, his hands trembling, and they watched in horror as he jumped toward them, silently tearing them in half with his bare hands. March 1st, 628. Count Niram, terminated. Yes, they did a good job. Polly muttered from the side, leaning back in her chair as Jasmine brought her a short stack of folders, fast and undetected, just as was taught, and as my technology permits. But we're feeding them more details. Even the simplest fact that they have experience with the application of mute fields will demand that more extensive measures are taken to conceal our presence. You're paranoid. No, just careful. If I were acting on my paranoia, I would have had them initiate an information lockdown on the entire territory and then kill everyone within 10 miles of the estate, including the Authority 10. But not everything can be ideal. I understand that. Polly rolled her eyes at me, Jasmine smiling and changing the subject. Well, we've crossed off your list, so now we get to rest and watch. 8 dead noble Nephilim and hundreds of their guards and personnel will be more than enough to stir up chaos. Question is, will we draw too much attention with the Magisterium's visit this month? Probably. I answered simply, Jasmine's face falling. Then how are we supposed to conduct our village operations? If you openly discriminate, people will start drawing connections. Then we'll have the third claw on our ass. You misunderstand. I'm not trying to avoid the third claw's attention. How does that make sense? If they find out what we're doing, and they're the scourge-controlled organization you say they are, then we're fucked. We'll be put into contention with the crown. Indeed, we will be. And yet it will have nothing to do with Iron Legion, just like the third claw will have nothing to do with the crown. Jasmine looked at me like I was dumb, making me chuckle. It's okay not to understand, young Padawan. Politics can be confusing and stupid like that sometimes. I thought you hated politics. I do. That's why I don't play the game. But others do, and we can take advantage of that. Just keep following the program, and everything will work out as I intend. As for the Magisterium, I'll be here to handle the affairs myself. Polly shot me some bombastic side-eye. I don't see you handling all the parent noble correspondence. While some people are better at some things than others. Polly grunted and massaged her temple. Yes, you just piss them off, and unfortunately you pay me enough to care about what our image looks like. I swear, if you just put on a few airs, you'd be ruling the world. Or, hear me out, you put on those airs for me, and I'll add 50% to your salary. Hell no. I unfortunately can't replace the most famous singular man in the world, no matter how many times you try to increase my salary. At the very least, Take care of the damn children. If we fuck up with this magisterium excursion, you can kiss our reputation goodbye. This is more important politically than any battle we've fought so far. Just make the smart decisions I know you've already thought about." I chuckled and put my hands up in surrender. Then, Jasmine raised her hand. "I'll try and replace him. And I believe in you. See, Polly, we can just plaster that cute face across our tanks, and we'll win the hearts and minds of every citizen that sees them." Her face fell. "If citizens are seeing those tanks, then we've got much bigger problems. Now get out of here. The students are landing in Camp Phoenix soon." All right. I waved and left the office, a plane already waiting for me. Once on it, I was leaving the glass desert and heading to Camp Phoenix. "Hey, do you know anything about what this trip is going to be like?" "Yeah, he must have told you some things about what it's like to be on his base." "Wait, have you ever visited it before?" Faye gave a wry smile as her classmates surrounded her. Being the effective sister-in-law of John Cooper, she had rapidly skyrocketed in popularity as he did. It had been years since he had made his rise, though, and she had adapted to the unceasing attention, as if being the daughter of a duchess wasn't enough. Sometimes it felt like her noble lineage meant nothing anymore, a mere footnote dwarfed by her relationship with John. She shook her head, her Real friends trying to keep people a distance away so they couldn't crowd. "No, I've never visited. And John hasn't really talked to me about what the base is like. This is as new to me as it is to everyone else." "Really? Seems a little hard to believe." "Well, military secrets are supposed to be kept that way." Faye inwardly sighed. It was only in recent days that she had finally realized just how little she knew about what John did. He was extremely busy as it was, so even after he started Iron Legion, becoming more than just a regular soldier, he hardly ever visited outside of the year's biggest events. Not to mention that, at least from her conversations with her mother, John had pioneered new protocols on the art of secrecy and counterespionage. Having applied those principles excessively with Iron Legion, there was extremely little about Iron Legion that anybody knew, let alone herself. Another reason why their class visit to its base would be so important. Faye knew full well why the entire Magisterium administration was in uproar when John had told them that he was opening Iron Legion's doors. It was an opportunity to get a glimpse of what was going on over there, an opportunity to learn and be taught about how the new premier force of the kingdom operated. An opportunity not even the highest class soldiers of the kingdom's military could receive. Faye partially believed it was because of her. She also knew that John had his own plans beyond her. She glanced out the window. The plane they were all in was the C-400 military cargo plane, a colossal plane capable of holding the entirety of the Magisterium's 3rd and 4th year classes, their luggage, as well as some extraneous cargo, while still being comfortably spacious. They had been in the air for a while now, every student glued to a window for the first hour of the flight before mingling about the cabin for the next 3 hours. Some students never left the window, enraptured by the sights only a bird could enjoy. They'd be landing soon, the plane in its descent phase. At some point, all the students were ordered back to their seats by a few of the Iron Legion soldiers on board. They were helmeted and therefore carried an air of undeniable authority, no noble child, no matter how high, willing to make them give their order a second time. As they made their descent, Faye gazed out the window by her head and watched the lightly snowed desert get closer. Still in early springtime, the snow had yet to retreat this far north. Nonetheless, it still looked relatively barren around the area. Not that anybody cared about the details. Most of the students in the plane had yet to ever even board a plane before. Being their first time in the sky, they were all completely enamored. They soon touched down, the rumbling of rapid deceleration shaking the plane before coming to a still. They lingered in silence for a bit before the soldiers gave the order. All the students unbuckled, and then the massive hatch of the plane dropped. They all stood and lined up as the soldiers gave their orders. Then, when the hatch dropped far enough, they saw who was waiting for them. Faye barely held back her smile, the corners of her mouth creeping up, seeing John standing there with a grin and a cigar. Amara was by his side, dressed in her conventional warlock wear an iconic witch hat, her eyes emanating a slight glow from just under the brim. Accompanying them were a few other armored soldiers, only one of them without a helmet. The puppet master, the supervisor for every excursion, took the lead behind the escorting soldiers, stepping out and moving up to greet John. The two shook hands, John's smile growing. Puppet Master, it's been a hot minute, and yet you seem to have aged a few decades. Keep doing crazy shit like changing the world, and you'll age me out all too fast. Hee hee, being aged out is only a problem if you come out the other end poor. Come to your work at Iron Legion, and I'll triple your current salary. What do you say? The students all gawked, Fei's face falling flat in synchronous with her sister. Since when was it okay to try and poach the kingdom's finest instructor? The puppet master's lengthy and silent deliberation didn't help either. You're going to make trouble for me, more than you have already. On the contrary, I'm actually helping you. Tell that dumbass boss of yours that he better start paying you better. Then after you get a raise, you can come to me for an even better deal. You're the only man I know who'd offer something like that. Can't say I don't take care of my people. There's a reason Iron Legion is now the world's most effective military. Fei watched John turn to them, the anxiety among the students sharply increasing with his attention. They were all filed in front of him, those soldiers still standing there rigidly. John scanned over them, his smile disappearing into a neutral gaze. I want all Nephilim to file out and stand to the side. If you are not Nephilim, remain standing where you are. Fei's heart beat a little harder as the soldiers turned to them and moved the Nephilim out. There was a bit of commotion, the Nephilim getting aggressive as they were mercilessly moved away from everyone else. They were gathered into a group to the side, the normal humans continuing to stand in place, not moving a muscle. The Nephilim composed about 35% of the class population, so the original group immediately became significantly smaller. John spoke. All Nephilim will remain in Camp Phoenix for the duration of the excursion. Here, you will be trained in practical, new generation combat, as is expected according to my contract with the Magisterium. I suggest all of you absorb as much as you can, because my services are both expensive and exclusive. He waved to his side, the unhelmeted soldier stepping up. Instructor Tuxin will be in charge of you all for the excursion. While on Iron Legion grounds, you will obey his every order as well as every rule he teaches you as standard for an active military training ground. Failure to comply will be met with appropriate punishment, not limited to expulsion from the camp. I advise good behavior, because I'm sure both the Magisterium and your parents would be disappointed to hear that you learned nothing from such a rare opportunity. Wait, you can't separate us. One of the Nephilim spoke out, realizing what was going on. There were clear mutters of anger from the rest of them. The student in question was the son of a marquis. He stepped forward, but was promptly blocked by the armored soldier, who ordered with a low tone. Stay in line. Don't get in my way. I'm talking to him, not you. The student moved to push aside the soldier, but as soon as his hand was raised, the soldier grabbed his arm and slammed him into the concrete floor. The horns coming out of the back of his head and curling forward took the blow for his skull, but not without cracking. The other soldiers in the area moved to surround the Nephilim, though they didn't brandish their weapons. There was no need to against students so much weaker than them. Instructor Tuxin stepped forward in John's stead. If Commander Cooper didn't make it clear, disobedience will not be tolerated. There will be exactly zero room for negotiation when you are given orders. In this place, your noble title is worthless, and your authority is only worth a warrant for babysitting. Stay in line, or be ejected from your excursion. Captain Borak, move these Nephilim to the barracks to await further processing. The soldiers started escorting the Nephilim, Fei feeling like they were being treated closer to prisoners than students. Once they boarded large armored vehicles and drove off, Instructor Tuxin turned to John and saluted. Interestingly, his salute wasn't the standard kingdom salute. It was different, a knife hand taken to the brow. The Nephilim will be handled according to your orders, sir. I appreciate it, Instructor. The Puppet Master's spare staff will accompany you. Just don't pop a blood vessel. No promises there, sir. John returned the salute, and the instructor turned to leave. The Puppet Master sent his own instructors with Tuxin, and other soldiers finished bringing out some of the luggage and cargo, the majority of it being left within the hold. The students watched John nervously, seeing him wave to the plane once affairs were settled. If you would all board the plane once more. They all turned, quickly filing back into the plane and into their seats. The hatch closed after John and Amara boarded with them, the plane spinning back up. Soon they started moving again, taking to the air. Once stable, John stood and moved to the front. He had full attention, his smile returning. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now on our way to the glass desert proper. There, Unlike Camp Phoenix, you will not only be trained in the ways of modern warfare, but you will experience true tactical combat. Humanity has been fighting battles against the Scourge in ways that have cost us hundreds of millions of unnecessary lives across history. Now, with Iron Legion, such wasteful combat is no more. You will all learn what makes us the greatest fighting force this world has ever seen. You will learn a kind of battle that will spell the eradication of the Scourge as a whole. Now, does anybody have any questions? Don't be shy. He smiled at everyone, but nobody spoke a word. After nearly a minute, Faye finally raised her hand, feeling like she was the only one that could. John gazed upon her fondly. Yes, Faye. I, was wondering why the Nephilim stayed in Camp Phoenix? If I can ask that. Faye shrunk back a bit, knowing how sensitive the topic was. The Nephilim had been just that ever since they had started spreading. John chuckled. Well, it's a simple answer, really. But first, I just want to clarify something. Something that I am ordering every single one of you to do while on Iron Legion grounds. He leaned forward, his smile fading a bit. Orders are orders. The chain of command exists for a reason, and every single one of you are at the furthest bottom of that chain. That means every single soldier you come across has the authority to give you all orders. However, this doesn't mean you aren't allowed to ask questions. The backbone of Iron Legion's success is knowledge and training. If you do not understand something, ask. If you want something clarified, ask. If you want more information, ask. Acquiring more knowledge is what's going to not just preserve your life, but contribute to the downfall of the Scourge. All of my soldiers follow these principles, and if you ask, you will receive an appropriate answer. If you refuse to ask questions when you don't understand something, then you are putting the lives of those around you at risk simply because you're too nervous to speak up. So, don't be cowardly during your time here. John turned back to Faye, and to answer your question, the Nephilim were separated from the rest of you simply because they aren't human. Iron Legion fights for the eradication of the Scourge, which means I'm not going to train my enemies. Make no mistake, Nephilim are corrupted humans, and I will not allow anybody to sugarcoat or downplay the reality of what they are. The plane started rumbling, soon entering its descent phase. After it hit the ground and landed, John stood near the hatch and faced them all. To all Magisterium students and elites, I welcome you to the Glass Desert, the heart of Iron Legion. All the students stood from their seats and filed out after the hatch dropped. They gazed upon the expansive airfield, planes buzzing by overhead in formations, a dozen helicopters of different shapes and sizes kicking up dust, and the sound of distant but visceral explosions giving their ears a kick. Several armored vehicles drove up to them, soldiers jumping out and moving to silently extract the plane's cargo after everyone stepped to the side. A few unhelmeted individuals of great authority walked over to John. He spoke to them for a minute before turning back to everyone. From now on, all you students are trainees. You are here to be educated on the art of modern warfare. Before any of you can be allowed to leave the confines of this base, however, you must receive standard issue armor and gear. These gentlemen right here will be responsible for seeing you all through processing. Just do what you're told, don't stray from the group, and you'll be just fine. The soldiers started filing the students into the armored vehicles, Faye excited as she heard more cannon fire. John waved as they left. Have fun.